Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy, and I'm being joined by my friend Dee Pierce, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends.
Hello, everyone.
And we're going to talk about uh, views of the ceasefire. We're going to give you some different views of the ceasefire and what it's about.
hmm
And then we're going to also present the Ukraine truth as seen by Colonel McGregor. And then finally, we're going to talk about Trump 2.0 as seen by Pepe Escobar.
That should be great.
So that should be really fun. Uh, so let's start with the view of the ceasefire.
Well, why don't you start sharing a bit? We'll just, build up the audience a bit, or, or
Okay, yeah, let's start that way first
to make
before we
sure.
get to it. Yeah, I should do that much more than I do. So,
Right.
so that's cool. Let me get this. Da, 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 da.
Yes, we're live. We're live.
We
Come
are
join
live.
us.
We are live.
It's a cold night up north. Join the show.
Yeah, and I don't have a fireplace here. Have you got a fireplace where you are?
Yes. Yes, we do.
Yeah, we live in apartment buildings, so no fireplaces.
Hopefully they keep it warm. Okay, and let me see. Joe Firestone.
Right.
Here it is.
Okay. So the first thing we're going to talk about is an article by Phil Giraldi, which appeared at uns.com. Phil Giraldi has a little nonprofit. He's former CIA, and he very often appears on the Judge Napolitano Judging Freedom show. He's a friend of the judges because Phil Giraldi really cares about civil liberties. He's really big on civil liberties. So, the title of the piece is it a real ceasefire or only a scam? And the subtitle is What Concessions Did Steve Witkoff offer to Netanyahu? This was published on January 17th, 2025. Doing pretty well at UNS. It's got 90 comments already in the day since it went up. Okay, the negotiations in Doha involved the United States, Israel, Hamas, Egypt, and Qatar. Remind me of Frank Sinatra's query. Quote, is it an earthquake or only a shock? But is it a good turtle soup or only a mock? Unquote. Given the history of the various Middle Eastern peace proposals of one kind or another, that briefly raised their heads only to die ingloriously, it would perhaps be wise to consider the latest Israel Gaza ceasefire. Originally due to start on Monday, to be like Sinatra's soup, a work in progress. I don't know why he was interested in Sinatra's soup, but okay. And, and maybe not even really in progress due to likely hidden agendas and understandings that run counter to what is being put down on paper. Excuse me. I'm particularly thinking of possible commitments to Israel by the United States that will give Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu options that will enable him to resume hostilities by citing Hamas violations of details in the ceasefire terms, whether they have actually occurred or not. That was how the game was recently played with respect to Lebanon and Syria, where Israel manipulated the situation to its own advantage, presumably with the full connivance of Joe Biden and his band of cutthroats. That might well be going on, but I did notice tonight that there was a report it's from Times Now. I think that's the Times of India. But the headline is Tel Aviv under dual attack. Israel Hamas war live. Hamas fires M90 rockets after Hezbollah hits 2 Israeli, and the headline stops there. But my point being, Hezbollah has now attacked Israel, and I don't think the 60 days was over. But still, I think they decided to reject the ceasefire and to begin to fight again. If that's true, if that headline is actually factual, and there has been a Hezbollah hit, don't be too surprised if tomorrow we find 500 rockets and missiles and drones heading towards Tel Aviv. But anyway, going on. That was how the ball game was recently played with respect to Lebanon and Syria, where Israel manipulated the situation to its own advantage, presumably with the full connivance of Joe Biden and his band of cutthroats. Yes. Interestingly, both genocide Joe Biden and Donald Trump are taking credit for the ceasefire, which has been delayed and not been fully accepted by Israel initially due to alleged details, quote unquote. Hamas is backing out of the understandings and creating a last-minute crisis that prevents a settlement, unquote. Netanyahu's office said on Thursday, adding that the government and cabinet would not meet to vote on the issue until Hamas backed down on, quote, new demands, unquote. Well, just to point out, I think the cabinet has now voted and approved the ceasefire. But Netanyahu is complaining there's going to be a delay because Hamas has to still provide a list of the hostages it's returning in the first round. And he says the ceasefire won't start until they do that. So until Hamas backed down on new demands, accusing the militant group of reneging on parts of the agreement in an attempt to gain further concessions. Sources in Israel indicate that the dispute involves the Philadelphia, quote, security corridor, unquote, where Israel wants to maintain a military presence, and details over the exchange of hostages. Some of the issues were reportedly resolved by Friday morning when the Israeli Security Cabinet met and approved the ceasefire. That was the Security Cabinet, but not the full cabinet. In other words, the government cabinet and the Security Cabinet are two different things. So it was approved by the Security Cabinet, but it still hadn't been approved by the government cabinet. Now it's been approved by the government cabinet, but as far as I know, it hasn't been approved by the Knesset yet. But I believe it's still scheduled to go off at midday tomorrow, okay, Israel time. But I'm beginning to doubt that's going to happen.
Well, now they're saying 8 a.m. 8 a.m. Gaza time.
Well, they're saying 8 a.m. Gaza time on Monday morning. Or is it 8 a.m. Gaza time Sunday morning? Hello, D.
Hello, 7 a.m. 8 a.m. Gaza time on Sunday.
Oh, that's earlier than originally.
Yes.
But there continue to be concerns about what will actually take place. Chris Hedges observes that Israel has never fully implemented any agreement made with the Palestinians. Oh, those Israelis are such a bunch of princes. Nevertheless, whatever eventually transpires, it is clear that Joe Biden, who actually collaborated with and enabled the Israelis to slaughter as many as 80,000 Palestinians, had nothing to do with the successful move towards the possible ceasefire agreement. Nor has he ever even had the bravery to confront the Israelis to compel them to moderate their behavior. It was Donald Trump who clearly sent uh, um, his chief Middle East negotiator, Steve Witkoff, himself a Jew and a dedicated Zionist, on a mission to give some straight talk to Netanyahu about his options with the new administration coming in on Monday. It would appear that Trump genuinely desires an end to the crisis over Gaza, and there are numerous reports that he has been sending signals to Netanyahu suggesting there is a new sheriff in town, that Gaza is both a distraction and bigger problems like Iran and BRICS, as well as bad politics and a huge public relations problem for the U.S. and Israel if the conflict is allowed to continue. One of the signals was notoriously a video featuring Columbia professor Jeffrey Sachs bad mouthing Bibi, saying, quote, Netanyahu had from 1995 onward the theory that the only way we're going to get rid of Hamas and Hezbollah is by toppling the governments to support them. That's Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. And the guy's nothing if not obsessive. And he's still trying to get us to fight Iran this day, this week. He's a deep, dark son of a bitch, sorry to tell you, because he's gotten us into endless wars. And because of the power of all of this in the U.S. politics, he's gotten his way, unquote. The video was posted on Trump's social media website, Truth Social. Also, Trump's warning that the hostages in Gaza would have to be released by the inauguration date, or, quote, all hell would break loose, unquote, might have been a demand to Netanyahu to do something in addition to being a threat to Hamas. I rather choose to believe that Witkoff offered Netanyahu a stick and a carrot. The prime minister is in deep trouble with his own governing coalition, most particularly the factions led by Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, who reject any ceasefire until Hamas is destroyed completely. But it now appears that even if they resign from the government, they will not choose to bring down Netanyahu. One inducement from Trump appears to be overturning a Biden decision to sanction right-wing Israeli settlers on the West Bank who are using violence to harass Palestinians in their remaining villages and on their farms. It has also been suggested that the U.S. might look the other way if Gaza itself might be resettled with Israeli Jewish settlers, eliminating any return home for the Gazans. Convincing the settler movement to stay positively engaged with what is about to happen could be crucial to Netanyahu's survival. To bring the settlers around, they have also been invited by senior Republican Party officials to attend the Trump inauguration on Monday. The settlers will also attend the first session of a newly created, quote, Friends of Judea and Samaria caucus, unquote. What a ridiculous thing in the U.S. Congress. That was my remark about that, of course. Judea and Samaria are Israel's preferred biblical names for the West Bank, indicating that the Republicans are amenable to Jewish states eradicating both the Palestinians and even the name of Palestine itself. More important in terms of what is happening on the ground, Israeli news channel Ynet is reporting that, quote, President Trump, according to a source familiar with the details, has already promised Netanyahu and Minister Ron Dermer that if they agree to a ceasefire and the withdrawal of IDF forces from the Gaza Strip, he will support Israel retroactively if it decides to return to fighting and violate the ceasefire. Alternatively, Israel might choose to renew fighting after the initial 6-week truce period is over, making it appear to be in full compliance with the ceasefire. They can play it either way and might even have a commitment from Washington to advance preparations for a joint action by the military against Iran. Now that's would be a pretty big commitment from Washington if Trump actually made it. It strikes me that if there were advanced preparations for such a military action, that would be highly visible to Iran, okay, and to Russia. And it has to be mentioned that just yesterday, Russia concluded, okay, its treaty with Iran. The military provisions of that treaty are secret, but it's a pretty comprehensive treaty, and it's clear from the wording of the treaty that in case of war, Russia will be helping Iran in some way, but maybe not sending troops, but be helping them, okay, with air defense, with arms, with missiles, and with other things they need. Also, by the way, they've probably already started helping them with their defense systems. And the word is that the Russians are integrating the Iranian air defense, okay, with their air defense. Why would they do that? Well, Alexander Mercouris says that it's probable a deal was made with Iran for the Iranians to reconfirm their commitment that they were not going to develop, a nuclear weapon, but refrain from that. And in return, they would be integrated within the Russian air defense system, which, of course, most of us know is the finest in the world. Going further, as a third incentive for Israel, the Trump administration has reportedly agreed to remove commercial U.S. sanctions that were initiated in November 2021 on the Israeli spy company NSO Group and its quote, targetable, unquote, Pegasus spyware that, quote, has been used to hack U.S. government officials and other top-level politicians, peace and human rights activists, international lawyers, journalists, and more, which was said to have played a key role in Saudi Arabia's murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, unquote. Biden administration officials claimed at the time that the move represents the first time that the Treasury Department has sanctioned people or entities for the misuse of spyware. The software, quote, allows a user to infiltrate electronic devices through zero-click attacks that require no user interaction or opening of the virus for the spyware to infect a device. Spyware, which has been used in dozens of countries, has allowed for the unauthorized extraction of data, geolocation tracking, and access to personal information on compromised devices, unquote. Wow. That's pretty serious. A list of 50,000 phone numbers of interest to NSO, quote, Pegasus, unquote, software clients has leaked and was published in France. NSO's founders were members of the Israeli military's top secret electronic surveillance unit 8200, and NSO is believed to be currently a front for the Israeli military and Mossad. According to X8200 whistleblowers, the unit's members used to mark an X on their headset for each assassination their surveillance had enabled. An Amnesty International report and also an investigation by the Washington Post and 16 other media groups revealed that clients using NSO's, quote, Pegasus, unquote, uh, uh, um, military grade spyware include many governments known to conduct surveillance of their own citizens. NSO claims that Pegasus is only used by legitimate agencies to spy on, quote, terrorists and serious criminals. Of course, I doubt that any of those have been convicted in a court of being terrorists and serious criminals. Just had to mention that. In other words, terrorists and serious criminals are people Pegasus doesn't like, or the NSO doesn't like, or the client doesn't like going on. But the leak list, quote, includes numbers of journalists, human rights activists, heads of states, royals, prime ministers, and the fiance of murdered Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, as well as of murdered Mexican journalist Cecilio Pineda Berto, unquote. The investigation by the Post, titled The Pegasus Project, identified and verified the names of several Arab royal family members, 64 business executives, 85 human rights activists. I'm sure Medea Benjamin is on that list. And more than 600 politicians and government officials. According to the Washington Post, the software was used in multiple, quote, attempted and successful hacks, unquote. The Post was particularly sensitive to the threat, as 189 journalists were on the list. In practical terms, the quote, the legalization, unquote, of Pegasus means that the FBI and the NSA will be able to use it to increase its spying on American citizens, which will mean a seeking out of critics of U.S. foreign policy, and one would not be surprised to see it employed to root at critics of Israel, which will be regarded as anti-Semitism, increasingly viewed as a major crime by U.S. administrations. So that means both Phil Giraldi and myself would likely be targets. The freeing up of Pegasus is a big deal, as it is a major money earner and source of top-level intelligence for the Israeli government and its security services. If my instincts on this are correct, Israel will strike as hard a bargain on the ceasefire as it possibly can, creating conditions or interpretations that will enable it to back out and resume its military operations after claiming there are mythical violations on the part of Hamas. It will be able to resume hostilities while still obtaining the release of a number of his hostages, which would be a boost for the Netanyahu government. Trump will shy away from exposing the Israeli false flag, having made his point that he is a peacemaker and in charge. The unsanctioning and congressional embrace of the Israeli settlers will also help Netanyahu politically. Interestingly, Israeli media and its public have reacted negatively to the news that a ceasefire is imminent, claiming that it is a, quote, defeat, unquote. In reality, Israel could, as ever, be the winner in what is taking place, with no real pushback from Washington. When it comes to dealing with Israel, Trump might talk tough, but could wind up going down the same path as Joe Biden. So will there be a real ceasefire? Maybe not. Phil Giraldi, by the way, who was Dr. Phil Giraldi, a PhD, and executive director of the Council for the National Interest, a 501c3 tax-deductible educational foundation. Okay, Phil could be right about this, of course. Okay, but there are, some alternative views. We'll discuss some here. But for what it's worth, that I think this analysis ignores the role of Saudi Arabia in all this, and Trump's desire to make a relatively quick deal with Saudi Arabia, to revive the Abraham Accords. Trump wants to broker a deal between the Israelis, and the Saudis, and build the IMEC corridor going through Israel as an alternative to Suez. Okay, and the Saudis have been stubborn about this, saying that they're not going to deal with the Israelis, until the Israelis have agreed to allow self-determination by the Palestinians. So, according to the Saudis, first comes a Palestinian state, then comes a deal. And if Trump is aware of this, and if Mohammed bin Salman is being stubborn about this, then I think it will be true that this ceasefire will prove to be a real ceasefire, because Trump will continuously lean on the Netanyahu government to fulfill the ceasefire, and he'll use the threat of holding back our arms, from Israel. Everybody agrees if he does that the war with Gaza is finished anyway. So it seems to me, if that's the case, and if Trump is firm about this, then it's better for Israel to basically go along with Trump, go along to get along, have the ceasefire, have whatever security the ceasefire brings to Israel itself, and then have the deal that's going to make Israel rich. So it's because of the possibility of this deal that I think this is going to be a real ceasefire. And I point out, with respect to the possible suggestions here, for example, the Pegasus Project, and we discussed this last night a bit on D's show. Neither of us thought that Trump would really want to legalize the Pegasus Project, because, after all, he might be one of the people the NSO is spying on. Why would he want to make something legal, that could target himself or his close associates, continuously leak secrets about, what they're doing, what they're saying? Seems to me the legalization of NSO, is dangerous to Trump itself, just as it was dangerous to Biden, and explains why Biden made it legal. So, I don't really believe that Trump would offer that kind of concession to Netanyahu. As far as the other concessions are concerned, I think those, again, ignore the possibility that Trump is looking to make a deal, to broker a deal, and to bang heads together to get a deal between the Saudis and the Israelis. All of the other concessions would actually work against such a deal. So, I don't think that Netanyahu's envoy would offer them. especially since Trump himself is likely to think that the threat of his cutting off arms is by itself enough to get the Israelis to cooperate. They may kick and scream. They may pretend they're trying to get out of the deal. But in the end, I think Trump will think, that Netanyahu will think, that he damn well better do the deal. Because if he doesn't, uh, they're not going to be able to run the war in Gaza anyway. So that is my reaction to this article. Dee, do you have an immediate reaction to the article?
Yeah, like I said, I just don't see Trump with that whole Pegasus thing, and especially all he went through. Um, with the court cases, with the FBI, and his first time in office, he wasn't familiar with things. He's familiar now. He understands, and I don't think he would. That whole Pegasus thing doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense also because it grants even more power to the deep state.
And that's what he claims to want to get away from the deep state.
Yes, he claims he wants to get away from the deep state. He claims to be afraid of the deep state. Well, I don't know if he said he's afraid, but it appears to us he's afraid of the deep state and what it can do because he's seen all the various things it can do. And they certainly stood in his way in the first administration, and they stand ready to stand in his way in the second administration. So why would he want to arm the deep state further and give them another tool to use against him? I don't think he would.
It makes no sense.
It makes no sense. Okay. Have you any other comments?
And I think, where Bibi Netanyahu is concerned, he's just playing his normal spin.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think BB is playing his normal skin, but I think he knows that he's got to do what Trump orders him to do because Trump, in the end, does have the big stick of stopping the flow of arms.
Yes, he does. And also the interest with the normalization.
Yes, yes. And BB is very interested in the normalization. He's very interested in IMEC. And I think Trump's commitment to both of those things, uh, okay, and his threat to get rid of the arms, those things taken together are more than enough to get BB to stop playing his games.
Right. Now Bibi just has to figure out with that whole group, you know, and uh, in Israel, that right-wing group, they're all over the place. Because right now in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, I mean, you have people that um, are for actually the deal, the ceasefire. They want the ceasefire, the hostages released. But then you have the other group that's against it, and they've been fighting with the police in Jerusalem. So it's just a lot going on right now.
Okay, so moving on. Last night, Badi and I did a piece uh, on Colonel Davis, Danny Davis, was doing an interview of Professor Mearsheimer. Uh, the subject, they discussed a number of subjects. Okay, there was an extensive discussion of Ukraine, which we went through last night, and some discussion, of Israel. But we had to stop at 41 minutes, of the YouTube. And I promised that we would get back to it today and do the rest of the video because the discussion was a very, very good one. So,
Okay, before we get into that, why don't we do the comments? We have some comments here.
thank you, Dee, for reminding me about the comments.
Okay.
Okay, so Oh, we got Friar Steve. Hey, Friar.
Yes, good to see you, Friar Steve.
Yeah.
Good to see Steve Wolfbrand is here. Good to see you.
Steve, I'm glad to see that you're here. And I think it must mean that you're all right also. I'm glad to see you still are all right. Friar Steve says, hello, Doc. Hello, D. Laugh out loud. Doc's still waiting to see this grand attack you keep prophesying about. I will keep waiting. Well, thank you, Friar. No drone or rockets raining down on Tel Aviv. Well, maybe not, but there is this video on YouTube that says there are. Friar Steve says Trump will authorize a full genocide. Yeah, maybe so. Friar Steve says if you think Trump's going to make it better, you're not listening to what he's saying. Trump is as right wing as Netanyahu. Unsure how you're not seeing this. I'm not saying Trump is not as right wing or more, okay, than Netanyahu. What I'm saying is that Trump wants to do a deal. He wants to do the IMEC deal, and he wants to do that very badly. And he wants to do a lot of other things which are more important to him than what the Israelis want to do to Gaza. So I think what Trump wants to do is to get Gaza stopped, and the Israelis aren't able to finish Gaza by themselves. And Trump certainly doesn't want to put any ground troops in there himself to help to finish off Gaza. So,
And another thing, a part of the deal is a Palestinian state. That's with the IMEC deal. Well, not the IMEC, but with the normalization deal.
yeah, if he wants to normalize with the Saudis, he wants to normalize the Israelis and the Saudis. According to the Saudis, he's got to have self determination of the Palestinians. So, all I'm saying is, I believe the Saudis. Okay, I don't believe them maybe as firm, as I would like to see about this, but uh, they do have an Arab street to contend with, and no one has been forcing them to say for a very long time now that it's a condition of normalization to have self determination first. But they keep saying it, so I keep thinking that they're serious about this and that they're going to force Trump, if he wants to normalize, that they're going to force Trump to force the Israelis to accept self determination of the Palestinians. Friar Steve says Trump is not afraid to conduct a full genocide in Gaza. I agree. He's not afraid to do that, but it's not a question of whether he's afraid to do it, okay, or not. Okay, it's a question of whether he will do that rather than make a deal with the Saudis. So says Frye says first he'll conduct a full genocide in Gaza, then he will turn it over to Netanyahu and the Saudis. Trump will pardon Netanyahu from any war crimes. Uh, Trump has no say over over whether Netanyahu is pardoned from war crimes. Uh, uh, that's going to depend on the ICC that is trying him, okay, for war crimes, and they're not going to pardon him. I'm afraid Trump doesn't have that authority.
Right. And Trump, for the most part, like I said, he wants to get on with business. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of money to be made
Yeah, there's a
with the
lot of money
deal.
to be made, and a lot of money to be made by Jared Kushner and other members of Trump's family also. And I think that these are important considerations for Trump. And I don't think he's as interested in, making the Israelis happy by conducting a full genocide, okay, in Gaza. By the way, they are not capable of conducting a full genocide in Gaza without getting a full-scale attack, from the Iranians, because the Iranians and the Houthis and Hezbollah are certainly going to stand in the way of that. Frey says Russia is in no place to engage in additional military operations. Nonsense. It's in a place where it can support Iran with arms, with military equipment of various kinds. Its factories are running 24/7, and they're producing an enormous amount of military equipment, and they can supply that to the Iranians. Fry Steve says, I will make a prediction: if Russia arms Iran and those arms harm Americans, Trump will authorize a retaliatory action by helping Ukraine even more. Oh, come on, Fry Steve. The Ukrainians are close to collapse. They're going to be collapsed. Oh, come on, Fry Steve. That's ridiculous. What are you reading? Trump will do whatever Bibi asks him to do. No, Bibi will do whatever Trump asks him to do. Trump didn't even have the decency to work on the Abraham Accords. He pointed off on his son-in-law. Trump does not care about a single pal. He wants them all gone as in genocide. Well, I'm not going to disagree with that, but I don't think it's relevant. There's a reason the Saudis gave Jared $2.5 billion. Yeah, I thought it was $5 billion, but okay. Trump will not deny Israel even a bag of meals ready to eat. He will give them all the ammunition they need to get the job done. They haven't been lacking in ammunition.
And the thing is, when it comes to Israel,
lacking in ammunition, they haven't been able to get the jobs done because Hamas is kicking their ass.
Exactly. And then it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop with Gaza. It doesn't stop with the West Bank. You're talking ethnic cleansing, a huge area. You're talking all of Lebanon. You're talking about with Syria.
So Fry Steve says, I'm afraid Trump will bring Pegasus to the U.S. to spy on Antifa. Fry Steve, we don't need to be worried about whether they're going to spy on Antifa. We need to be worried about whether they're going to spy on you and me. I mean, there isn't even an Antifa. It's not an organization. It's not a thing. It's like an idea that some people adhere to. Trump will never even threaten to cut off arms to Israel. He will arm them even more. I think he's already threatened to cut off arms to Israel. That's why we have the ceasefire. Trump is a Teflon Don. Trump is a liar. Trump is a deep state. No, Trump is not the deep state. He's in conflict with the deep state. He's going to try to take over the deep state. Absolutely. He's going to try and take over the deep state, but he hasn't done it yet. Trump will use Pegasus to gain information. He's a bad guy, not a rational, but not a rational actor. Okay, I agree. Trump is not an entirely rational actor, and I agree he's a bad guy. So what does that have to do with this argument? The issue here is whether the motivation to make a deal with the Saudis is stronger than the motivation to kill all the Palestinians. There's no doubt in my mind that his motivation to do a deal with the Saudis is much stronger. Self-determination was not a part of the Abraham Accord. No, it wasn't, but the Saudis have since then told him they're not going to normalize with the Israelis if there's no self-determination for the Palestinians. Frosty, I do believe Trump has already threatened the ICC. Yes, he has, and Congress has already threatened the ICC, but that doesn't stop the ICC from indicting Netanyahu, convicting Netanyahu, and putting out warrants for his arrest all over the world. There are many countries in the world where the ICC is respected, and they will arrest Mr. Netanyahu if he shows up there. they will arrest him if his plane gets into trouble and he's forced to land in one of those nations. Trump can't stop the ICC. He would have to bomb The Hague. And he ain't bombing The Hague anytime soon. Fries says lots of money to be made, 2.5 million Palestinians standing in the way. Trump will get genocide Gaza. Doc, when I say Antifa, I mean he's going to make it up. Well, he may make it up, Friar Steve, but you and I will probably be part of Antifa. Yes, Doc, I fully agree, but Trump will use it as an excuse. Antifa is just in his imagination. I agree with that. We agree there, Friar Steve. So we agree on a lot, but we disagree on what, God bless you, honey.
Thank you.
On what the ceasefire was fundamentally about. I think the ceasefire was the first step in Trump clearing the way to get Israel to stop with the genocide and turn its attention to other things, specifically to getting the IMEC deal done. And that is going to require self-determination of the Palestinians. So let's move on to John Mearsheimer. Okay.
Okay, that sounds great.
Okay, so we've got where we left it just yesterday. Where we left it yesterday was we were 41 minutes in, roughly 41 minutes in. So I'm going to pick it up from there. Okay, Dee, if you want me to stop any place to comment, then, just tell me and I'll stop.
All righty, sounds great.
Okay.
Standpoints, no matter how this works out, we'll just have to wait and see how it actually does play out.
Danny, as I've said on a number of occasions, Biden has presented Trump with a bed of nails in Ukraine.
And that's about the most polite way that you can put it. I actually just published a piece in the publication 1945 yesterday that laid out actually more than 3 years, going all the way back to 2014, the terrible decisions that the United States have made, which any one of which could have had an off-ramp and could have prevented the war or brought it to a quick conclusion that would have been eminently better than anything that's going to happen now. And we've paid for a lot of that with the Ukraine side has paid more for it than they're going to. But still, speaking of Trump and whatever's next, let's change the topic here a little bit, and that is with China. Trump kind of had a surprising comment on his Truth Social here, where he said he spoke with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday. That's earlier today, and in his Truth Social platform, he said, "I just spoke to Chairman Xi Jinping of China. The call was a very good one for both China and the USA. It is my expectation that we will solve many problems together, and starting immediately," Trump wrote. "We discussed the balancing trade, fentanyl, TikTok, and many other subjects. President Xi and I will do everything possible to make the world more peaceful and safe." Now, I'm all for that, as opposed to being antagonistic or so. But what do you make on this, based on the difficult relations that the two had in Trump's first term, and where do you think this is going to go?
You want to remember, in Trump's term, there was no Ukraine war, and there were no wars in the Middle East. And therefore, he could concentrate on China and he could play hardball with the Chinese. Now, Trump is facing a huge set of problems in the Middle East. He's facing a war in Ukraine. And given those two sets of problems, the last thing he wants is trouble in East Asia. And therefore, he's being very nice to the Chinese.
Okay, I think that's a very strong point. Just a very strong point. The international situation is very different now. Trump sees that, and he's acting accordingly.
This is hardly surprising. He's pinned down in the Middle East. He's pinned down in Ukraine. And he's got to do everything he can to make sure that trouble doesn't start in East Asia.
And how much is, I mean, I can only assume that China would be eager to take advantage of those realities you talked about there. But what will this do, in your view, to bilateral relations between China and the United States? And is there a prospect that things can actually improve, that whether it's financially, economically, with some of the trade deals or so, or certainly in the national security advantage area, because, there's still that Taiwan thing hanging out there. How do you see that evolving?
Well, one could argue, given my rhetoric about all the trouble the United States is in with these two other regions, that this is a window of opportunity for China, and they should jump through it. But the problem that Xi faces is he has significant economic and political problems on the home front. And the last thing he wants is a major crisis or a war with the United States. Furthermore, if you look at Taiwan, I think militarily, this is not the time to even think, if you're Xi Jinping, about conquering Taiwan. The balance of power is against you. It's not going to work. So I think that both Xi.
Okay, I got to say something there. There have been a lot of military scenarios, simulations run by the United States concerning possible conflict, with the Chinese over Taiwan. And there isn't one simulation where the American military has been victorious against the Chinese. Now, I think there are good reasons why the Chinese may not want to fight over Taiwan now. They've always been playing a long game with respect to Chinese, with respect to reunification, suggesting that their schedule for it is that it will eventually come by 2050. So they're not looking for reunification this year or next year or the year after, though they have said their schedule might be speeded up if the United States continues to work on trying to stimulate the independence of Taiwan from China. So they have actually said that. Also, in many ways, they're in a better position than they've ever been to attack Taiwan. Their armed forces are much stronger than they've ever been before. And the major trading partners of many of our allies, in East Asia, the major trading partner for those allies is China. So I don't really think we're in a very strong position with respect to the Taiwan Straits. I certainly think the missiles the Chinese have can destroy any aircraft carriers we send their way. The only advantage that we have over them that I can see is our submarine fleet is, still number one in the world and makes them, extremely vulnerable. But we, in turn, are vulnerable to their missiles, as well. And by the way, the Russians have seen to it that they have hypersonics by now. So I just don't think the balance of power is against the Chinese right now. I think John Mearsheimer is wrong about that. I would have liked it if he would have explained why he thinks the balance of power is against them. He seems to think it's obvious. I don't think it's obvious at all.
Xi Jinping and Trump both have an interest in doing everything they can to dampen down tensions between the two countries. So I would expect, one can never be 100% certain in international politics, but I would expect that you won't have much trouble between the two countries in East Asia anytime soon.
Okay, I think that he's right about that. But the reason why he's right is not so much because the balance of power is against China. I think the reason why he's right is because China wants to do business. It doesn't want to have a big war with the United States. And I think the other reason why there's not going to be a big war is because Trump understands that he has to wind up the other conflicts that the United States is involved in before he again returns to China. But whether he will ever return to China also depends upon how he perceives the progress that China has made in relation to military strength. It's going to take him some time to get rid of the Ukraine war, and it's going to take him a while probably to get rid of the wars in West Asia, okay, as well, to extricate himself from those. So he probably won't be ready to turn to China for some time anyway. And meanwhile, China continues to build up its strength. Okay, so I agree with him. There won't be a war soon.
Well, that would certainly be good news, because that's the last thing we need, is to have any tensions going on that part of the world, on top of all the other fires that are burning around as well. I just wonder, though, because there's obviously still a lot of China hawks out there, and that would love to push him into a confrontational relationship with Xi Jinping, and they're probably gnashing their teeth at his nice comments here. Kind of a bigger question: do you think that the time of the neocons has passed? Are they starting to wane in their influence? I mean, you've had Mike Pompeo was basically banished by Trump as soon as he won the election here. Nikki Haley, two of the bigger China hawks. Now she's been sidelined, and nobody even hardly pays attention to her. Is it premature to write them off, or how do you see that?
Well, I'm not sure I'm comfortable these days using the term neoconservative the way most people do. I think the bottom line is that the United States is a remarkably hawkish country. It's filled with warmongers.
I think that's such a great point for Mearsheimer to have made. Such a great point. The country is filled with warmongers.
That is true. You hear the media, different people in the media, constantly bringing it up.
Yeah, they're constantly bringing up and constantly falsifying the facts of the military balance. I mean, these people believe the Russians have sustained 1 million fatalities in the Ukraine war. And they believe the Ukrainians have only sustained something like 100,000. They're just crazy. They're lying to themselves. They don't understand what has gone on.
And this includes the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Both parties are infected with Russophobia. They loathe Vladimir Putin. They believe that military force is a wonderful instrument for solving all sorts of political problems around the world. They think the United States is an exceptional nation, and it has a right, a responsibility, and the capability to run the world. And this viewpoint transcends both parties. The fact is that Trump is actually something of an anomaly. He's very unusual, and he's surrounded by people who are super hawkish. I mean, you can call them neoconservatives, and I understand what you're doing, and it makes a certain sense. But Marco Rubio, Keith Kellogg, Pete Hegseth, these are all remarkably hawkish people, both in their views on the Middle East and on Ukraine, and of course China as well. So,
and he failed to mention, this guy Mike Waltz from Florida and Sebastian Gorka. I mean, those two they're spoiling for a fight. But we do have to add, people spoil for fights in different areas of the world. I think Sebastian Gorka is spoiling for a fight in Eastern Europe. I think Mike Waltz is probably spoiling for a fight in Latin America. And, Marco Rubio was doing that too. I think Hegseth is spoiling for a fight in West Asia because he wants to bring about the coming of Armageddon because he's one of those guys. So I think these folks are a little strange.
Yes, they are.
I think that
I'm sorry I interrupted you, Dee. Please.
No, I said I agree with you. They are. They're strange and they've just got these mindsets and they're convinced.
And they're convinced. They're highly ideological. And they're fooling themselves about the military power, of the United States. I mean, for God's sakes, we only have like 450,000 people in the army right now. What can you do with 450,000 people? The Russians are soon to be at 1.5 million, and they have less than half of our population. And they're going to have 3 times the army that we have? I mean, come on.
the neoconservatives, that small group of people who we used to identify as neoconservatives, Paul Wolfowitz and people of that sort, they've receded into the background somewhat. Robert Kagan is something of an exception. But I think the neoconservatives, narrowly defined, have receded into the background a bit. But it doesn't really matter because the United States is just so hawkish.
There are 3 simple changes I tell all of my arthritis patients to make. Number 1, you have to start drinking.
On the China issue before we shift to the last topic. If President Trump were watching this show right now and texted me and said, "Hey, ask Professor Mearsheimer this question here. What would you tell him that he ought to do? How should relations with China evolve in his term here in ways that would most benefit the United States?"
Well, there are 2 dimensions to our containment strategy. Number 1 is the military dimension. Number 2 is the economic. And on the military dimension, I would tell him that he should treat our allies in East Asia, especially in Southeast Asia these days, much better than he did during his first term, and better than the Biden administration did, for purposes of putting together a balancing coalition to contain China. And I would also tell him to go to great lengths to make sure that he doesn't do anything foolish that ends up starting a war with China. With regard to the economic dimension, I think that everybody in the United States agrees that there's a serious competition now in place between China and the United States to develop cutting edge technologies, AI, quantum computing, so forth and so on. And it is imperative that we win that competition, or at least not lose it. And I think that he should concentrate very heavily on that.
And what is the best way to win that competition? Since we're not talking about the military aim anymore, what can you do to position ourselves to win that competition? Is that something you do domestically to try to improve something, or do you try to do something to counter the other side? Well, how does that work?
Well, you do both. There's no question about that. You do everything you can to feed the American economy, to feed that part of the American economy that develops these sophisticated technologies. And at the same time, you do what you can to hinder Chinese growth in terms of the development of these sophisticated technologies. I'm not sure how much you can do to slow the Chinese down, but there are all sorts of things you can do to accelerate American development of these high-end technologies, and we should, take the necessary measures to do that. Very important to win this competition in developing high-end technologies, or at least to stay as far ahead as possible of the Chinese over the years ahead with regard to this matter. And again,
okay, so we have 340 million people here in this country. They have 1.4 billion people there. They have many times the engineering and science graduates graduating from colleges, okay, and graduate schools and schools of engineering than we have here. They have many times the people we have engaged in basic research in China. And we have people here in Congress who are reluctant to spend on the sciences and on technology because they are highly anti-intellectual. Given these facts, what are the chances that we're going to be able to keep up with them? We would have to induce huge cultural change, go back to the kind of mindset we had in the 1950s and early 1960s, and we still wouldn't be able to catch up with them because we don't have near as many people as they do. I mean, this seems pretty obvious. I mean, why does John think that we can keep up with them? No, I'm not saying we should not try. We should try to develop our technology and our science to the utmost. I mean, that's what a high culture ought to be doing. But it's not about competition with the Chinese. It's about doing the best we can do and about being the best that we can be.
Exactly.
But we are not going to win the competition with the Chinese in this particular dimension. They have reached their takeoff in this respect. And they are just crunching the whole rest of the world. Neither we nor the Russians nor any other power in the world are going to be able to keep up with them. Our best chance is to collaborate with them and to try to break down, rather than build up, international barriers to scientific and engineering collaboration. We also need to learn a lot from them. For example, they can put together hospitals in literally days. We have to learn to do things like that.
Right. It would be better for us to work with them to
Absolutely.
improve things here.
Yes. Much better to much better to simply collaborate with them. Uh, I should say something with respect to Mearsheimer. He's probably the leading current advocate of the realist school, okay, of international relations.
Hmm.
I mean, probably um, um, in the world. He has a chair at the University of Chicago, which was always the leader in this particular field of international relations. Uh, he's written um, very many books. He's highly distinguished in this area. But what the realist school is about, how you apply that to international politics, is you play balance of power politics. The kind of politics the powers of Europe were playing during the 19th century and the 18th century, for that matter, and ever since the Treaty of Westphalia
Hmm.
in 1648. So that's the kind of international politics he wants to play. So when he was talking there about, uh, setting up a coalition in Southeast Asia for the U.S. to counter the Chinese, he was talking about playing balance of power politics. I'm not sure that's the approach that we should be pursuing at this time. I much prefer Jeffrey Sachs's approach, which is a collaborative approach to international politics. Okay. I think John is in the competitive school. I mean, he doesn't want to have wars. but he thinks that serious competitions among the great powers are inevitable. There's a lot of truth to his view. It's worked that way from time to time. In my view, it's our job to try to end the dominance of balance of power politics in international affairs. Any comments about that, Dee? Okay, I guess not, so I'll go on.
Again,
Yeah.
that's the economic dimension, but there is an important military dimension as well.
And how do you see that one?
Well, there, as
What's
I
ideal?
said, what's ideal is to have a formidable containment policy. And to have a formidable containment policy, as I said, you want to make sure you have good relations with your allies and that you foster the development of tight relations between all of your alliance partners. And we've not done a very good job at that. And that was especially true in the first Trump administration. I might add, Danny, it would be very good if we could get out of the Middle East in large part and get out of Europe in large part and pivot fully to Asia so that we had in place a formidable deterrent. I want to make it clear, I'm not talking about, looking to pick a fight with China so that we can weaken China. I don't want to fight with China, but I want to make sure we contain China so that it does not dominate Asia the way we dominate the Western Hemisphere. And that requires pivoting to Asia, and that requires having smart alliance relations and also winning this war over cutting edge technologies.
Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with those, especially on.
China just released a microwave-based type of energy weapon. I just saw the headline. I haven't had a chance to see the video on it, but it's supposed to be highly formidable. I just wanted to interject that because I don't think we have that kind of weapon around. I think the Chinese are ahead of us in that.
On significantly reducing our footprint in the Middle East and our not leverage, but the risks that we face there. So I'd love to see those come down, and obviously to diminish what we do in Europe and let the rich European nations handle much more of their security than they have, and lower our exposure there as well. Last one I want to ship to. We'll kind of stick here in the final port here in the Middle East, though. And that is on the most recent news breaking out that finally, at least nearly finally, Israel and Hamas have reached some kind of a ceasefire deal. Apparently, the Trump administration put some arm twisting on Netanyahu in the 11th hour. Finally got this turned around. I think they had a vote earlier today in the war cabinet for the Israeli side that they have approved that, and it's supposed to go into effect at 4 p.m. on Sunday. How do you see that situation evolving? Because for a long time, it looked like the Netanyahu and his government had no interest whatsoever in having a ceasefire. They just wanted to continue fighting. But now, all of a sudden, after whatever it is, about 15 months of war, they have changed their tune. Why do you suppose that is?
Well, I think there are two reasons. One is, I think there's no question that Trump played hardball with the Israelis, because Trump does not want a war in Gaza when he takes office on Monday. Trump has insisted that this one be shut down by Sunday, so that when he is sworn in on January 20th, there's no war raging in Gaza. So pressure from Trump mattered. Furthermore, the Israelis are in real trouble in Gaza. And I'll talk more about the agreement in a minute. But Israel has not been doing well in Gaza. They're suffering significant casualties there, especially in northern Gaza. And at the same time, by almost all accounts in the Israeli media, Hamas has reconstituted itself, and it remains a formidable fighting force, all which is to say the Israelis have not been successful in Gaza. Moreover, as you know, their army is in real trouble. It's an army that's configured to fight short wars, not long wars. And they've been fighting a very long war in Gaza. And at the same time, that army is now deployed in southern Lebanon and in Syria. And it's beginning to wear at the seams. And the end result of all this is that there is pressure from inside Israel, especially from inside the Israeli military, to reach some sort of ceasefire in Gaza and put this war behind Israel.
And what is the, I guess, the objective, do you think, of the Israeli government? We'll kind of keep it at the government level, not look at the internal reports just yet, because there certainly has been, they wanted to say, we want to win an outright military victory. And I think you and I have been talking for many months, as far back as you've been coming on our show, that was always an unrealistic and maybe even unattainable military objective, because what you just mentioned there has happened, was determined to happen, is destined to happen, that because of so many people, innocent people that have been killed in this wanton destruction of the Gaza Strip, that they would create probably more enemy than they destroyed, which is exactly what we observed in both Iraq and Afghanistan during my time on active duty, and now it's playing out that way. But what are they going to do now? Because you can get a ceasefire, you can get an end to this current iteration of the war, but you've done nothing to address the underlying conditions, and many of which were led to the 10-7 in the first place. Now you may even say it's on steroids, because you have a whole population that's living in tents for all practical purposes. Where can this go from here after the ceasefire?
Danny, if you read the ceasefire agreement, it is a case of the Israelis admitting defeat. It's not portrayed this way in the Western media. You would expect that, of course, but it's acknowledgement of defeat. The Israelis have agreed to pull all of their troops out of Gaza. The Israelis accept the fact that Hamas is still intact and will control parts, if not all, of Gaza. Furthermore, food will now be allowed into Gaza, as will fuel, water, and medicine. Furthermore, the Palestinians are free to return to their homes. Remember, a few weeks ago, we were talking about the Israelis cleansing northern Gaza and not allowing Palestinians to come back to the northern part of Gaza. That's all over with. The Gazans are now free to move about the area as they see fit, because the Israelis are leaving. Just think about it. The Israelis are leaving Gaza. Furthermore, they're leaving the Philadelphia corridor, which is the line of control between Egypt and Gaza that the Israelis said that they were going to hang on to for a really long time. It's quite amazing what is going on here. Yes, the Israelis are getting their hostages back, and I think that's a wonderful thing, to be honest. But many of those hostages are now dead. And furthermore, the Israelis have been forced to release huge numbers of Palestinian prisoners to get their hostages back. So I think what has happened here with this ceasefire is a disaster for Israel. Now, you might say, John, this ceasefire is not going to hold. We'll see. We'll see how long it holds. But even if it doesn't hold, what are the Israelis going to do? They're then going to turn around and win the war in Gaza? No, they're not, because they haven't won it up to now. And that's the reason, that's part of the reason they agreed to sign the ceasefire. The fact is, they are in deep trouble.
Okay.
So that's a wonderful series of points, of course, by John Mearsheimer. He's not trying to soft pedal it. He's just telling you Hamas has won. Israel is leaving. Okay, at least for now. They are going to go through the first phase of this. And in the first phase, they withdraw to 800 meters from the border or 750 meters from the border or something like that. So they're starting the withdrawal now in the first phase. Now it'll be important to see if they go beyond the first phase. But I think the Israeli army is tired.
They are tired. And they've been saying this. This has been going on for months.
Yeah,
That
been
they've been saying
asking
it.
for relief. And they're stretched thin. They've got some people in Syria now. And they've still got people up in Lebanon now. And the ceasefire there is evidently close to over, if it's not over already.
I think it's the 27th of the month. Around that time, January 27th or 26th, it should be over.
But as I said, there was an attack by Hezbollah today.
Right.
So Hezbollah might be done with it at this point. And they have plenty of justification to say, hey, the Israelis haven't been observing it, so we're not going to observe it either. It's done. But we have to see whether that actually comes about in that way.
Right, because I know they've brought it to the UN. Enough is enough.
Okay, but anyway, John gave a full dose of truth there. Very straightforward and very detailed.
Yes, he did.
So let us go on with it.
Yeah, and that's certainly the case there. And man, we could do a whole show on this, and I'd love to have you back as soon as we can to go into this in a lot more detail. But in the limited time we have left, look a little north of that. What is the situation for Israel in the current ceasefire situation with Hezbollah?
Did you know that if you're over 65 and suffer a fall,
Well, that one is a real mess because the Israelis keep violating the ceasefire. And that's in large part because the Israelis are itching to destroy Hezbollah, and they understand that they have not destroyed Hezbollah. So we have a situation here where they have not destroyed Hamas. They now recognize that with this ceasefire agreement. They have not destroyed Hezbollah. They're in Syria. And yesterday, they, for the first time, attacked the military forces of the new regime in Syria. So the Israelis are overextended. Their army is worn out, and they have not defeated their principal adversaries. This is a terrible situation. So all this happy talk in the United States about how the Israelis have prevailed in all these conflicts and they're remaking the Middle East in their own image is just not serious. And by the way, go back to what we started with talking about Iran, right? You pointed out that the Russians and the Iranians are now moving even closer together, which complicates Israel's position vis-a-vis Iran.
And we didn't even talk about the Yemenis because they're also still not quelled. And wow, everywhere you look, all the fronts, the security environment for Israel is going to really, really be complicated for the foreseeable future. And if we had more time, we'd talk about even the internal contradictions within the Israeli government, which even makes it more difficult. But I guess we'll have to leave it there for the time being. But man, do I really appreciate you coming back on today. This is why we love having you on so much, because you provide so much clarity on some really complicated issues, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Danny. It was a pleasure being with you.
And we appreciate you guys too. If you haven't done it already, be sure and like and subscribe before you leave the channel. It has a lot more help than you know. And also, hey, I know a lot of you.
Okay, we'll be getting to another one of Danny Davis's videos, okay, a little later, okay, in this video. But I think that was really a heck of a discussion with John Mearsheimer. It was really so comprehensive.
And the one thing that, the Israelis don't want to accept, they don't want to accept this loss. You have a lot of them are just, they shouldn't be in shock, but I think their mindsets were just that they were just going to settle in Gaza and what their plans were.
Yes, absolutely. And those plans are dashed right now. Totally dashed. And Daniela Weiss is very, very unhappy.
Oh, yes, she is.
She is really going mad right now.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if there's any comments on this one. Israeli people need to replace Netanyahu. Let's see. Fire Steve's got a number of comments. Okay, I'm going to read these things, okay, Friar Steve, because I like to read, alternative views. But anyway, Friar Steve said, I heard him speak once in California, Claremont College. He warned if Ukraine signed the Budapest Memorandum, Russia would violate it, even though he's changed his view because of his relation with the Chinese Communist Party. He makes millions from his communist comrades. His words, he was correct. He didn't sound like he was that friendly to China in this particular video, did he, Friar Steve? During Trump's term, there was the buildup for both operations, allowing Putin to sell oil to the United States, help them build their war chests. Trump inherited what he created. I don't think Trump did that much to build up Russia. He certainly didn't overturn the government of Ukraine. I mean, I know he wasn't friendly to that particular government, but he didn't try to overturn them. He didn't try to stop what the deep state started in 2014. Trump also weakened the U.S.'s military by stopping training operations with South Korea. Well, I'm sure Trump did a number of things that were ill-advised from the standpoint of wanting to fight China. 2027 may be the last chance China has to try to take Taiwan. It will cost them way more than they will gain. But U.S. sanctions will be severe. Friar, I'm sorry, but I'm having a tough time simply laughing. I don't think the Chinese care about our U.S. sanctions, okay, at all. I think they have more power to sanction us than we have to sanction them. In purchasing power parity, they are a larger economy than we at this point in time. Their manufacturing capacity is many times greater. Their capacity to produce products, okay, is many times greater, and the world wants their products. We cannot sanction the whole world. We have been sanctioning the whole world, and the whole world has been taking steps to escape from our sanctions. Right now, China, okay, is not afraid of our sanctions. They have plenty of other nations to trade with. They can trade with Russia. They can trade with North Korea. They can trade with Iran. Okay, they can trade with India. They can trade with Saudi. They can trade with Egypt. Any sanctions we put on them will be ineffective, completely ineffective. When the U.S. military does war games with China, we fight at China 20 years ahead. We don't want to win our war games. We only learn from when we lose. I'm afraid I don't agree with that. That's just an illusion that you're talking about, Friar Steve. I know there are some simulations where we fight a China 20 years ahead, but there are also simulations where we fight China now. And whenever we do, we lose. There isn't much question that they can knock our aircraft out of the waters, out of the water right now with their hypersonic missiles. And as the months go by, they'll have more and more and more, of those. The only way we can attack China is with our submarines at this point. Our aircraft carriers and other ships don't count for a damn. They can take Taiwan whenever they want to take Taiwan. The truth is, they don't want to take Taiwan right now. They have a very profitable trade going on with Taiwan right now. Why should they want to start a war with Taiwan? Also, once a year, a huge number of Taiwanese, at the time of the Chinese New Year, right now, millions of Chinese will go home to China from Taiwan. And millions of Chinese from the mainland will visit family in Taiwan. There's a tremendous migration both ways at this time of year. There are peaceful relations. Yes, they posture from time to time because China is trying to, of course, remind people that Taiwan is a province of China, something which our State Department agrees with. You can see that right on the State Department's website. That was true in the Trump administration, it was true in the Biden administration, and it's true now. Taiwan is a province of China. One day, China will decide to reunite with Taiwan under the same government. Taiwan will decide to reunite with China under the same government. It is likely to happen peacefully by 2050, as the Chinese have often said. I don't see China risking trade relations with the U.S. and Western allies for Taiwan. Well, our trade relations with China have suffered tremendously under Biden. I personally hope that Trump restores our trade relations with China so we can benefit from those particular relations. Oh, yes, I know we want to protect certain of our industries from the Chinese, but the proper way to protect them is to subsidize those industries. It's not to have tariffs. Tariffs are stupid. Trump is stupid for wanting tariffs. Do subsidies instead. That has been long known, to be the case. If the World Trade Organization objects to the subsidies, then deal with the World Trade Organization when that comes. But if we need to develop certain areas because they're vital to our national security, then we'll develop those areas and we'll subsidize the industries in those areas. And the World Trade Organization can go hang. If the Chinese act that way, we can act that way too. Our army has engaged in combat. The Chinese military has not. Chinese military has not engaged in combat for a very long time because the Chinese haven't had any wars for a very long time. I guess it's more than a quarter of a century since the Chinese have had any wars, and maybe since 1978 or something like that. They've been amazingly peaceful. but they have a far larger military than we have. It is extremely well equipped, okay, with modern equipment at this time. Of course, they drill perpetually. They will be a tough opponent. They were a tough opponent back in the 1950s. There's no reason to assume they won't be a tough opponent at this point, even though they haven't been engaged in recent combat. By the way, the combat that we've been engaged in recently has been combat against insurgents. We haven't been fighting, a conventional military with equipment as good as ours for a long time. Our army has not engaged in that combat. And in that respect, we're on equal footing with the Chinese. Doc, USS Hypersonic Missiles Program, you should take a look into it. I have. Our hypersonic missiles program is not ready for prime time yet. It's not in manufacture yet. We don't have any hypersonic missiles that are ready to go. We are way behind the Russians in the hypersonic missile program because we were too stupid to see that that was the future. Forrest Steve says AUMX is ASEAN with US, and we have Australia and New Zealand all versus China. Australia has something like 30 million people in it. New Zealand has 5 million people in it. We don't have the whole of ASEAN with us. They are very friendly to China. The trade relations with China are very good. We have Japan and South Korea as military allies. Those nations right now are more important than Australia and also New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand aren't ready to attack China, I'm afraid. AUMX 2025 is prep against China maritime conflict. We have been preparing for some time with the war with China. Marco Rubio is hawkish on China. I know he's hawkish on China. But I don't think he wants to have a war with China anytime soon. We have NATO 2.5 million. NATO is collapsing, Friar Steve. They can't put together an army of 2.5 million people. It's not going to happen. Wake up and smell the roses. Russia and China will both be alone if they engage in a conflict with the U.S. and our allies. No, they'll have Iran. No, they'll have Iran. Okay, India will be neutral in such a conflict between Russia, Iran, and China. There's something like 2.7 billion people on their side. I'm talking about the population. What would be the population figures on our side? 340 million for the United States, 40 million for Canada, 30 million for Australia. If we could ally with nations that had a total of 1 billion people, we would be lucky. Also, the allies we have are not ready to field extremely large armies. At this point in time, it would be difficult for the UK to field an overseas army, an expeditionary force of 40,000 people. The same is true for France. Germany is not ready to go along with us on this. We can't field anything like the size of the military the Russians, their allies, and the Chinese would be able to field. It's just not there for us, Steve. U.S. has collapsed its military-industrial complex. China has increased theirs. Unsure how that's going to change. Unsure how that's going to change. We only have 3 places we build ships. We need 30 to catch up to China. Friar Steve, that's right. That's right. U.S. will defend Taiwan. With what? With what? With who and what army? China will kill U.S. service members. It will be like Pearl Harbor 2.0. This will enrage the American public and they will get revenge. I am afraid that we will use nukes first, but we will become a total war nation and weapon production will be like World War II all over again. That's a possible scenario. It's a possible scenario. But right now, we will be facing a modern China with huge manufacturing production capability, much greater than our own, even if we became like we were in World War II. No, Steve. We have to be content with being the major power in this particular hemisphere. We cannot contest with China on its own ground. If we go to war with China, the U.S. will starve their population by cutting off all grain to China for years. We will always control the sea. You just said yourself that we can't compete with them in shipbuilding. So how are we going to control the sea? How are we going to control the sea? How are we going to control it against their missiles and their rockets? Even if we starve our population. Oh, you're saying we can starve their population by cutting off all grain to China. So you think the Russians are incapable of supplying enough grain to China? Right now, the Russians are the world's largest producer of grain. You can never get rid of Hamas by force. Bibi helped them come to power, that's right. I hope this ends. Hamas will not be part of the Abraham Accord, nor do the Saudis have any love for Hamas. Once the Saudis take over and Hamas killed Saudis, this whole scenario will change. Well, that may be, but the point is that the Saudis do want a Palestinian state. Nobody said Hamas has to be the governing power in such a Palestinian state.
Right, they're talking about a unity government. They met in Russia on that, and just today they were talking about that. I believe in Cairo, talking about was it Cairo? And I'm not too sure where they were talking about it, but they were talking about the unity government.
Okay, so I'm going to have to skip some of the other comments. Friar Steve, it's getting late. It's getting late, and we have a lot to do. The EU doesn't want Ukraine in the EU, no, and they don't want them in NATO either. No, we don't have 2.5 million. Give me the figures for each country. There is no 2.5 million. Russia steals its grain from Ukraine. Come on, Friar Steve. That's ridiculous. Is that what you want, NATO forces in Ukraine? There aren't going to be any NATO forces inside of Ukraine because the Europeans won't sit still for that. None of them want a war with the Russians. You can discount all of the NATO forces because they're not going to fight, okay, with the Russians. I'm going to go on to the next one. And the next one is a piece from the Electronic Intifada. It actually starts at about 28:05. Let me move this forward a little bit. Okay, there it is. Okay.
Pretend that Hamas was the ones blocking it.
Sorry.
Using bad words against him. Utterly disgusting. And they are now exposed by Donald Trump, who picked up the phone or sent his envoy over and said, you're going to stop this now. You're going to sign the deal that you refused for the better part of a year. And Netanyahu said, yes, sir, I'm going to do it. And all the reporting in the Israeli media, we've had these last minute glitches yesterday and again today, and now the cabinet is delaying the vote. The Israeli media see right through it. They're saying, oh, this is all Netanyahu acting out to the end to pretend that he is in control and that he is fighting every last concession, whereas the reality is he is not going to dare defy Donald Trump. Now, the question is, why is Trump doing this? I've had lots of people saying to me, oh, Ali, that there's no Trump has no sympathy for the Palestinian people. I don't assume he does. He's never really expressed any sympathy for Palestinians. He hasn't in his statement since the ceasefire deal has announced. But what do we know about Donald Trump that's consistent? And I discussed this in the article that Tamara just put up that we published the other day, is that Trump has expressed, as we saw with the Jeffrey Sachs video he shared, this impulse against the endless wars, not because he has great sympathy for the targets of U.S. imperial wars, but because he sees these wars as draining the United States and costing the United States. In his first term, he was a complete failure at stopping any of these wars. And in fact, he contributed to the situation now by, among other things, ordering the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani in Iran, and of course, supporting Israel to the hilt, which is why this is now so surprising. But what is consistent about Trump is that he doesn't seem to have to put any value on so-called US allies. He doesn't care about NATO. He's hostile to NATO, and he's hardened that position. In his first term, he was saying they have to reimburse us and pay up 2% of their GDP. He's raised that to 5% now. He's saying NATO countries have to pay the US 5% of their GDP, basically, or increase their defense spending, which would all go to US military industrial companies anyway, mostly. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't care about Germany, which is supposedly the bedrock of the transatlantic relationship. And he doesn't care about Canada, the largest U.S. trading partner with the longest land border between any two countries, and he's prepared to. He's saying we'll cut off the trade with Canada. We don't need their cars. We don't need their lumber. He's insulting Justin Trudeau as the governor of Canada. In other words, as if it's already the 51st American state. So that's what's consistent about his worldview, is that he doesn't put any value in these relationships that he doesn't think directly benefit the United States. So if that's the case, the question I would ask is, why would he care about Israel, which is a tiny country, a massive drain on the United States? According to Jeffrey Sachs, and in a video shared by Donald Trump, is dragging the United States into these wars that have cost literally trillions, have cost the United States literally trillions. And Israel, he looks at that and he says, well, we've sent them $25 billion just since October 7th. And
they can't
Joe
win.
Biden wants, sorry?
And they can't win.
And they can't win. And Donald Trump, there's one thing he hates is a loser. He likes winners. You know, that's the type of guy he is. And Joe Biden wants to give Israel another $8 billion on the way out. So that's why I'm not so surprised by this. And his approach is, well, if we're paying your bills and there's no one's bills is that the United States is paying more than Israel's, then you do what we say. And the implication of this also is it shatters the myth that the Israel lobby drives things. Trump may be a singular figure in a sense that he has the political clout to do this. And I think one indicator is, I looked at this, take the most fanatical pro-Israel person you can find in the United States Senate, someone like Lindsey Graham. You can't find anyone more fanatically anti-Palestinian and genocidal than Lindsey Graham. If this deal had been the same deal had been imposed on Israel by Joe Biden back last year, Lindsey Graham would have been screaming bloody murder. He would have been saying, we have forced our ally Israel, who we love more than life itself, to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorists. And it's a disgrace that Joe Biden has done this. Well, guess what? Lindsey Graham loves this deal. And he's only mad that the Democrats are trying to steal credit from Donald Trump for this deal. So to me, that's a significant indicator that the politics around Israel are capable of changing surprisingly quickly. Now, does that mean that I think everything is going to be rosy, that Donald Trump is going to be a great ally of the Palestinian people, that he's not going to take measures that are incredibly harmful to Palestinians? None of that. But for the moment, this is where I think things are, and things are contested and contestable. And it is not a given anymore that the United States is just going to be in lockstep with Israel, especially.
Okay, so up to that point, I entirely agree with what Ali is saying. And I think he's made the points extremely well, explained the reasons why it's appropriate to view the ceasefire as a product of Trump, in his authority, and therefore as something real. How do you feel about that, Dee?
I agree with what he's saying. He had good points.
Yeah. So let's go on, because he's got some further good points.
Actually, after this catastrophic last 15 months, which, even if you disregard the suffering of the Palestinian people, have done nothing for the United States, nothing for its influence in the world, nothing for its hegemony, nothing for its economy. Nothing good has come out of it, even from a purely American nationalistic perspective.
I think that's the key point, really, is that this is contestable. And if there's one thing that you can say about Donald Trump is that he has, I mean, unlike Antony Blinken, who's clearly a fanatical Zionist, and unlike the sort of desiccated husk of whatever's left of Joe Biden's brain, who Donald Trump doesn't have doesn't seem to have an ideological commitment to Zionism. As you were saying, he likes winners, and Israel is increasingly starting to look like a loser. And it's what is, and you've talked about this, Ali, you talk about this in that article. There's this shift we've seen really in the last year or two on the right in the United States, where there is no longer complete lockstep unity in favor of Israel like there used to be. There is increasingly more voices on the right in America who are more skeptical of Israel. And in a way, I suppose that's kind of similar process to what happened in the US in the Democrats over, a far longer period. These things are contestable, absolutely.
Yeah, and then one sort of last point I want to make on this is people are saying, oh, well, yes, but Trump wants to, he wants the Gaza thing to stop because he wants to push forward with normalization, with restoring the Abraham Accords and so on. In fact, he says that himself in a post on Truth Social that he put up after the ceasefire deal was announced. And he said, with this deal in place, my national security team, through the efforts of the special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, will continue to work closely with Israel and our allies to make sure Gaza never again becomes a terrorist safe haven. We will continue promoting peace through strength throughout the region as we build up the momentum of this ceasefire to further expand the historic Abraham Accords, referring to the agreements that normalized Israel's ties with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco. And of course, the big prize here, supposedly, is Saudi Arabia. And there have been, murmurings and rumblings that that's what he wants to do. And what I want to say about this is all of that may well be his intention. There's nothing in there that sounds great for Palestinians. He doesn't talk about Palestinian self-determination or even a Palestinian state. He doesn't mention it at all. So this is not an ally in that sense. But the point is, America's plans don't necessarily go to plan. What is it that the resistance fighters say? They plan and Allah plans, and Allah is the best of plans. They plan and God plans, and God is the best of planners. Well, we can paraphrase that a bit, that America plans, but America isn't always the best of planners. My point is that the Abraham Accords were already in place when Trump was president last time, and that didn't stop October 7th. That didn't kill the Palestinian cause, as they hoped and intended it would do. And just adding Saudi Arabia to the list, a country that has done nothing for the cause of liberating Palestine, and formalizing a relationship with Israel that it's already had, really doesn't change the equation. So that may be their intention, but what the last 15 months have proved is that no scheme, no group of collaborators, no set of Arab tyrants posing for photo ops with Benjamin Netanyahu, none of that will make the central question of Palestine disappear. And the option, Israel, this was the thing that hung over everyone, that Israel could go in and just, they believed they could do it. They believed they could go in and destroy Gaza and topple Hamas. And they went in and they certainly committed a genocide, but they didn't topple Hamas. They didn't destroy the resistance. And the resistance still has its weapons. And this is crucial because a deal like this doesn't depend on trusting Donald Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu. It's why the resistance insisted on structuring it in phases so that they have leverage at every step if Israel decides to renege on the deal, which is a very high possibility because that's what Israel does. And even if we get through all three phases and then Israel decides to reinvade Gaza or whatever it is, the resistance still have their weapons. And so that's where we are. I just want to say all that because really this is an achievement of the resistance. And that achievement has even changed and affected politics within the United States. And we should not approach this as everything is a foregone conclusion. Everything is an American secret plan that is going to be rolled out just as Donald Trump wants. That's not the way things work. It's not Donald Trump and the United States who make history and write history. It is the people of the region who write their own history.
Yeah, and like,
Okay, so I think all of those are very good points. I want to add to what Ali had to say. The normalization, getting the Saudis in, means that you have to compromise with what the Saudis want. And one of the things the Saudis want is self-determination for the Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
So if Trump's number one priority, is normalization, and that's why he did the ceasefire. He wants it to lead to the normalization. To get that done, it will be necessary for Witkoff to order the Israelis to finally allow the self-determination of the Palestinians. What will Witkoff say to get the Israelis to do that? Well, first of all, he will say, you're not going to be able to finish the genocide and the ethnic cleansing because if you don't go through with this, with our plan, we're going to stop sending you arms. So you won't be able to complete the genocide anyway. And Hamas still has its weapons. They still have their weapons. Hezbollah still have all of their weapons. And Iran has even more of their weapons because they've been getting more from the Russians. All this is happening. That means your plans for genocide cannot be completed. But what you can do is you can work with us to conclude this overarching deal with the Saudis so we get the IMEC transportation corridor going through Israel so you can all get rich and we can get rich too. And isn't that in the end better than you're completing the genocide of the Palestinians? That's what Witkoff can say to them. And Witkoff can say, you're not completing the genocide anyway because we're not going to let you.
Right.
So you might as well go along with us in this larger deal, which is much more important for all of us, including you, and including your continued existence as a nation here in the Middle East. And this deal, if this deal takes place and if the Saudis come over to our side, we will, and if we stop, if we stop the genocide, Hezbollah will stop fighting, stop using its weapons. Hamas will stop using its weapons. The Houthis will stop attacking. And Iran will tend to its own business. And we can all go forward to a brighter economic future, which will be better for all of the Israelis, okay, as well. Of course, you'll have to do some hard things. You'll have to resettle the West Bank, specifically get out of the West Bank, take the settlers into Israel. That's going to have to happen, okay, if they want to stay. But, you know, that's going to be up to them.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to have to accommodate yourself to self-determination of the Palestinians and to what the Saudis want, because that's the only way to get the IMEC corridor done. And that is what I want to happen, I being Trump.
Right, and it looks like already, I just saw in Haaretz, that Israel pledges to allow rebuilding of Gaza as part of the ceasefire deal. So it has that, and we talked about this yesterday, that they're letting 600 trucks of food enter daily, and Egyptian construction companies will build roads, schools, and hospitals.
Oh, so there's something in this for Egypt too.
Yes, so Egypt is on its way doing this. So why would they be doing this if everything was going to be bombed out?
Yes. Yes, they're interested in doing it because they'll make a lot of money.
Yes.
And I guess they're not so afraid of IMEC in relation to its impact on the Suez Canal and traffic through Suez.
Right.
Uh,
Okay, so Doc has something. Actually, Fire Steve has something. He says here, Doc, the moment I hear from conditioned weapons to Israel, I will buy you a coffee.
Oh, you'll buy me 3 coffees. Meanwhile, but let me buy you 1 coffee. Thank you, Friar Steve. It was Hamas who insisted, okay, not Israel. Who insisted on what? Okay, I'm not sure what Evelina is referring to there.
As the phase, I think the phases. Let me look back.
Yes, Hamas insisted on phases. Yes, they did.
Yes.
Yes, they did. They insisted on the phases because they wanted to put incentives into each phase for Israel to continue to do the deal. Okay, there are a number of other comments from Friar Steve, but I'm afraid time is short. And I do want to get to Doug McGregor because he was terrific. And what Pepe Escobar had to say was also terrific.
Alrighty.
So let's get to Doug. Okay, right now, let me see what I got here. I got to share this. Okay, Doug McGregor was on with Dan Davis. Okay, also. So this is a second one of Dan Davis's videos. That would.
It was actually, well, I'm going to have it solved.
Wait, hang on a second.
For anyone struggling with ear ringing, do not drink cold water. You may.
Most annoying. Okay.
So it's back to the.
Okay. So let me find where we start this here. Okay. So this is a long section. That picture is right at the end of it. There's a lot to go through here. Okay, we'll start it right here.
Well, he's going to have this solved in 24 hours. And then it was actually, well, I'm going to have it solved before I even get into office. And then it was well, it's a little harder than I thought. And now it's 3 to 6 months, maybe, and hopefully before 6 months. I think as the reality starts to appear more to President Trump, he realizes that this is going to be a more difficult situation. How do you read, Doug? And by the way, let me welcome back Doug McGregor, CEO of Our Country, Our Choice, highly decorated combat veteran. First of all, Doug, just welcome to the show. I don't think we've had you on yet in 2025.
No, Happy New Year to everyone.
Yes, and certainly grateful to have you on here. And we're especially like, despite your, or even in addition to your normal high qualifications for all these stuff, you for a period of time worked for Trump at the end of his first term. So you kind of have a window of how he may think. And I just wonder what your thoughts are when you see this trend progression from his initial conversation about 24 hours to now 3 to 6 months.
Well, a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, I think he's misguided in thinking that the problems in the Middle East will ultimately solve themselves more quickly than what's happening in Eastern Europe. I think he's apt to be very disappointed on that front as well. In fact, I think it may be infinitely more difficult. As far as understanding President Trump, you need to understand the people around him. And if you look at the people that he surrounds himself with and listens to, it's not surprising that he would have made any of those comments. I can't think right off the top of my head about anyone who may be more uninformed about reality in Eastern Europe, Ukraine, and Russia than Keith Kellogg or his sidekick, Fred Fleiss. And it seems that those two had presented a way ahead that Trump eagerly accepted. And if you look at some of his, X's or tweets, whatever we call them now, he adopted all of the utterly false, inaccurate numbers for casualties that have been, proselytized by the CIA, MI6, and the supporters of perpetual war against Russia. So I think from the very beginning, he was starting from a base of knowledge that was frankly inaccurate. So it's not surprising he said that. Now, as far as what can he do, I think increasingly the answer is almost nothing to profoundly influence events on the ground in Ukraine. The one thing he should do is that he should say, look, I didn't start this war. This is not my war. I want to end it as quickly as possible, and I'm announcing an immediate suspension of all military aid to Ukraine. In addition to this, I am ordering all U.S. personnel in or out of uniform, military intelligence, technical advisors, everything out of Ukraine. If he did those two things, the war would stop. That's what needs to be understood, because the Ukrainians obviously couldn't continue, and I'm sure Mr. Zelensky would be either in his wife's Bugatti or in their private jet flying off to Italy or somewhere else to spend their ill-gotten gains. There are hundreds of millions of dollars in cash that they've stolen in the course of this war from the United States and its allies.
Nobody believed me at first, but now everyone wants one. My friends.
Yeah, you mentioned Keith Kellogg there. Even he has kind of changed his tune a little bit the closer we get to Inauguration Day. Here he was on Fox News a couple of days ago talking about how he wants a fair deal.
I really do have a lot of confidence in his ability to actually get to a position where this war is actually over. And I think what people need to understand, he's not trying to give something to Putin or to the Russians. He's actually trying to save Ukraine and save their sovereignty. And he's going to make sure that it's equitable and that it's fair. It will set the conditions for the president. And then he'll eventually get to a position where he'll be talking to President Putin and also President Zelensky as well. And I think they're going to come to a solvable solution in the near term. And when I say by the near term, I would like to set a goal on a personal level and professional level. I would say let's set it at 100 days and move our way back.
So if he doesn't do what you suggested, Trump, at Kellogg's insistence, which is, all right, we're going to stop immediately cessation of all the support, et cetera. If he doesn't do that, what basis does he have to negotiate something within 100 days that's going to be acceptable to all three of those parties?
Effectively nothing. I mean, the problem you have in the Trump camp is that everyone's running around saying, we need a win. We need a win in Ukraine. We have to have a win in the Middle East. We need a win in Ukraine. We need a win in the Middle East. Everything's about a win. Well, there's nothing to be won in Ukraine. There never was. We've dragged this war out. We're the cause of it. We installed this government in Kiev in 2014. And we've been subsidizing what is effectively an organized crime state. All the people involved in this and the government are crooks. I feel badly for the Ukrainian people that have been misled by all of this and dragged into this abyss. But the truth is, we can't fix it. It's beyond our ability. And the Russians aren't going to trust anything we say. So we say, oh, well, we accept Ukrainian neutrality. All right, fine. Then they say, we want a comprehensive arrangement for security for Russia and for NATO and for the European people who border Russia. A perfectly legitimate ask in my judgment, but we don't want to grant that because that doesn't look like a win for us. Because what it means is that we stop interfering in other people's affairs in Eastern Europe. We get out of the area. We leave Ukraine. Oh, we can't do that. It'll look like we lost. We lost the day we decided to involve ourselves.
We did. I think it's pretty evident to anyone who's willing to look at the reality of the situation, which we do frequently when we have you on the show here. In his testimony, I think it was yesterday, future Secretary of State Marco Rubio was asked a lot about the issue about the Ukraine war. Now, some of what he says here, I think, is an accurate depiction of the current situation, but then his provisions seem to be a little bit askance.
The destruction that Ukraine is undergoing is extraordinary. It's going to take a generation to rebuild it. The truth of the matter is that in this conflict, there is no way Russia takes all of Ukraine. The Ukrainians are too brave and fight too hard, and the country is too big. That's not going to happen. It's also unrealistic to believe that somehow a nation the size of Ukraine, no matter how incompetent and no matter how much damage the Russian Federation has suffered as a result of this invasion, there's no way Ukraine is also going to push these people all the way back to where they were on the eve of the invasion, just given the size dynamic. Putin's goal now is to have maximum leverage so that he can basically impose neutrality on Ukraine, retrofit, and come back and do this again in 4 or 5 years.
Okay, so several things here I want to ask you. Some of
I think that Senator Rubio has missed his calling. He should have gone to Star Trek in order to try out for a part, as a Vulcan. In other words, all you have to do is take a look at his ears to see how appropriate he would have been for such a part. But anyway, back to Danny Davis.
I think is right in terms of especially the harm that's been done to the Ukraine side. But a couple of things he said in there was important. One is he said that there is no way that Russia could take all of Ukraine. Do you agree with that, first of all?
Russia has never been interested in taking all of Ukraine. The war had nothing to do with any of the things that he and Bill Kristol, his mentor, and the other neocons are saying. This war was about the plight of the Russian people living inside Ukraine. That's where it started. That's what the Minsk Accords were about. And of course, we know that the Minsk Accords were just buying time for Ukraine to arm up for its war with Russia. So the first thing is the underlying assumptions are false. Now, could Russia march to the Polish border if it wanted to do so? Yes. There's no question about that. Russia doesn't want to do that. Russia doesn't want to rule the rest of Ukraine. Russia simply wants that part of Ukraine, whatever it turns out to be, west of the Dnieper River, I suspect, to be neutral on the Austrian or Finnish models, probably on the Austrian model. No foreign bases, no foreign forces, so that it poses no further threat to Russia. Russia has not fought this war to give anything away at the negotiating table that would result in a future conflict. And if you listen to Rubio, you listen to all of the neocons.
It's a shame so many people struggle with the most common teeth and gum problems when
continue indefinitely. Everything is about a pause, if you will, followed by a resumption of war to destroy Russia and the evil state that it represents. So that's hopeless.
And then one of the other things you said in there was that however incompetent the Russians may be, hard for me to really get my hand around that but it is a commonly held view that the Russians are incompetent, even though they completely thwarted an offensive attempt by Ukraine in 2023, and since that time has just been methodically grounding down the Ukrainian army and eating up territory. What do you say when you hear these people say stuff about the incompetence of the Russians.
It's the wholesale embrace
Mm-hmm.
of this mountain of lies designed to justify perpetual conflict against Russia. It is
the wholesale embrace of this mountain, okay, of lies. I think that was a beautiful way to put it. I
Yes.
think so far in this whole video, he's been laying out the truth as he sees the truth. Okay, and I think how he sees the truth is very close to the truth. Okay, here we go. Though I'm gonna play some more unless you have further comment, D.
No, play on. Play on.
Okay.
is not in America's interest. The people who are pushing these things the hardest are not even Americans, in my judgment. These are people with backgrounds and connections that reach back over 100 years into the region. These people are fighting old agendas. They're resurrecting old anger, old hatreds in order to keep this thing going. So, Dan, there's nothing we can do. If President Trump refuses to reach beyond this very small universe of people that are misinforming him, and he's not going to listen to people that are going to tell him the truth, even though some of the truth did, as you point out, come out with even Rubio. But even there, the truth is misguided. The exchange rate in terms of deaths and casualties is somewhere between 1 to 6 and 1 to 8, with Russian, for every 1 Russian, 6, 7, or 8 Ukrainians have been killed or wounded. I mean, it's that simple, and it's getting worse with each passing day. It's been disastrous for the last several months because the Ukrainian force is collapsing. And when armies collapse, they take heavy casualties while they're trying to retreat, withdraw, or escape destruction. And that's what's happening in Ukraine.
And so you just described something that matches what we can physically see on the battlefield. We can watch the line moving to the west. So what you said lines up with what we observe. But here's what some other people are saying that is rather contradictory to what we observe on there. And yet the microphones keep getting put in the faces of guys like Ben Hodges.
So before we get into Ben Hodges, we have to note that Colonel McGregor, since I've seen him streaming, has been bucking for a position inside of the Trump administration, okay, as a top advisor to Trump. Okay, I don't think that invalidates his commentary, okay, at all. I think his commentary is right on, and that it tends to prove that he should be an advisor to Trump, okay, because he is not interested in war for the sake of war. He doesn't have a bias against Russia. He doesn't have an anti-Chinese bias. He doesn't have an anti-Iranian bias. All he has is a pro-American bias. He wants to see us right our ship. I don't agree with all of his perspectives, but when it comes to facts on the ground of the war, okay, in Ukraine, he is always right on. I've never known him to be mistaken.
Putin, on the other hand, much weaker now than he was a year ago. The obvious hundreds of thousands of casualties, lost equipment, the Russian defense industry.
Putin doesn't have hundreds of thousands of casualties. If he had hundreds of thousands of casualties, there would have been an uprising in Russia long ago.
That's true.
Okay. It's the Ukrainians who have had the hundreds of thousands of casualties. So Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, okay, is lying about that, because it's impossible to ignore the reality of the casualties, okay, in Ukraine. The reason why it's impossible is because the statistics have been available about the burials, okay, in Ukraine, about the growth of the cemeteries, okay, in Ukraine. And those have been observed by various commentators. in a variety, of places. There's not much doubt that Doug was talking about a ratio of 6, or 8-1. I think Doug is being conservative today. I think the ratio is more like 10-1. The current estimates of the military fatalities of Ukraine are running as high as 1 million, at this point, whereas Russian casualties, I shouldn't say casualties, but fatalities, are running less than 100,000.
Is in the toilet, and they lost their Syrian ally, Bashar al-Assad. Russia did not even have the capacity to save Assad and keep doing what they're doing in Ukraine. I think the Trump team sees this, and that maybe their own calculation is changing about how they interact with Putin.
I just almost don't even know what to say. Why this guy keeps saying stuff like that when everything on the ground is the opposite?
It's he's on the payroll. I mean, I don't know if he's still at this SIPA organization that is, virulently anti-Russian, and the people that own that and finance it are equally anti-Russian. So he's being paid handsomely to say those things, and there's no accountability for any of the lying. None. I mean, that's the biggest problem in Washington. Somebody said to me the other day, we're dealing with state-sponsored media in the United States. And then another person said, not really. We just have billionaire-sponsored media. In other words, billionaires own the government. Billionaires are setting the policy. Billionaires are telling the lies, and everybody is supposed to believe it. It just simply comes through the media that people used to think was capable of telling the truth. It isn't now. There's no truth. They're just narratives. He's part of the narrative. It's enriched him. It keeps him flush in cash. He's going to continue that to the bitter end, unless there is accountability.
When I first started assembling this little device to make water out of thin
in the short term.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not. But that's the kind of thing that
they're telling the lies, and everybody is supposed to believe it. It just simply comes through the media that people used to think was capable of telling the truth. It isn't now. There's no truth. They're just narratives. He's part of the narrative. It's enriched him. It keeps him flush in cash. He's going to continue that to the bitter end, unless there is accountability. I don't see any evidence that there will be in the short term.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not. But
so this ties into a theme we often explore in our streams, and that's the theme, of dumping the corruption, in the United States. What we have here is corruption from the military, where someone is just reflecting a narrative, and he's getting paid to actually reflect a narrative. It's all part of the billionaire control, of our politics, as Doug, has said. So here in this video, he's telling us the truth, not simply about the military facts on the ground, in Ukraine, but he's telling us the truth about the corruption in the media and the corruption of the so-called military experts who are getting paid to give a particular narrative and to ignore all other counter narratives. In this case, the narrative of Ben Hodges is completely at variance with what's actually going on. And you can easily come to this conclusion by looking at the reality of the progress on the ground, which the Russians have been making now for a very long time inside of Ukraine, and the impending collapse of the armed forces of Ukraine. You can see from that Doug is telling the truth and Ben Hodges is telling a lie. So there is that. I do want to say one more thing. Doug has said that there are people following agendas based on ideas that are centuries old. I want to express here the idea that people have been following foreign policies that were laid out in a book called The Grand Chessboard by Zbigniew Brzezinski. He wrote this book in 1997, I believe, and it's been kind of a Bible for the neocons ever since. So who, was Zbigniew Brzezinski? He was a professor, a Columbia professor, very cogent in the field, of international politics and relations. He was the national security advisor, if I remember correctly, for Jimmy Carter, and he was very close to Jimmy Carter. But who else is he? He's an immigrant, from Poland, and he was someone who was well educated in the history, of Poland, and he always was very negative towards the Russians because of the long history of domination of Poland by the Russians. How long, is that history? Poland used to be a world power in the 17th century. Well, really in the 16th century also, but in the 17th century, they were a world power until they came face to face with Peter the Great, and also Sweden. And what Peter the Great represented was the rise of Russia as a world power. In the waning days of the 17th century and the beginning of the 18th century, and the decline of Poland, in part, is marked by the rise of Russia, taking land away from Poland. Russia started but this particular process, but all through the 18th century, the other great powers, of Europe were engaged in a process of taking more and more land away from Poland until in the 1890s, the Poland was partitioned among the great powers, including Russia, and it lost its independence as a nation. It did not get back that independence until the end of the Second World War. And of course, after the Second World War, it was a satellite of Russia for some time. So, but anybody who's familiar with the history of Poland, and who is Polish, is likely to be very anti-Russian. And Brzezinski was very anti-Russian. And a lot of his followers were very anti-Russian, as well. And they still are. And they have agendas to get back, at Russia, which are centuries old, and which are shared by Poland today and by decision makers in Poland today. It has come down through history. A lot of people who have emigrated, from Eastern Europe, to the United States, are very anti-Russian because they were parts of nations, of Eastern Europe, which at one time or another were absorbed into Ukraine. And Ukraine was absorbed into Russia. And so they resent, domination by the Russians, and they still do. So we have to recognize the role of perceptions of Russia that was shaped by the history that, various nations and ethnic groups had with the Russians over a long period of time. So I did want to call attention to that. There are people who are part of our national defense establishment and our national political establishment who have a grudge against the Russians to settle. And in a way, that grudge is centuries old.
That's the kind of thing that one of the problems with the mainstream media is because those guys like him keep getting the talking points and getting to go in front of the camera. Jumping back to Rubio here, now that he's going to, in the next segment here, he's going to talk about what Trump is going to do. So he first laid out what he views as the circumstance on the ground, and then he was asked, what is Trump going to do about it? And so
the problem that Ukraine is facing is not that they're running out of money, it's that they're running out of Ukrainians. There's a size differential here that's important. Now, what Vladimir Putin has done is unacceptable. There's no doubt about it, but this war has to end. And I think it should be the official policy of the United States that we want to see it end. Now, what that master plan looks like it's going to be hard work. This is not going to be an easy endeavor, but it's going to require bold diplomacy. And my hope is that it could begin with some ceasefire. And we're going to have, in order to achieve objectives like the one that needs to occur in Ukraine, it is important for everyone to be realistic. There will have to be concessions made by the Russian Federation, but also by the Ukrainians, and the United States has lent itself there. It's also important that there be some balance on both sides. In essence, it will be difficult to achieve this objective of a ceasefire and ultimately a peace settlement unless both sides have leverage.
And do you think that both sides have leverage? Does the United States and Trump have leverage?
No, we have no leverage at all. We have worked ourselves into a position where threats of sanctions, threats of action, all of those have fallen on deaf ears now. I don't think anybody in Moscow pays any attention to anything we say anymore. Well, I think they do, at least insofar as they continue to worry about our readiness to potentially use nuclear weapons against them. Yes, and they're worried about that. But beyond that, no, I don't think so. Here's the problem with Rubio's entire approach. All the governments in Europe, the major governments certainly, France, Germany, Italy, I think eventually Great Britain, though it doesn't look that way today, all of these governments are going to fall into the hands of nationalists. And Rubio and his friends and backers are going to be horrified, claiming that Europe has become a Nazi movement or something, which is just crap. Nationalists don't want to be dragged into wars and see their countries destroyed needlessly. People who are not nationalists, who are international.
Okay, so I have to make a comment there. The history of nationalism, going back to the pre-war period, that is World War II, pre-World War II period, the kinds of nationalisms which flourished in Europe at that time were fascism, and Nazism. And of course, those were very aggressive kinds, of nationalisms. We used to make a distinction here in the United States between patriotism and nationalism. Perhaps that is a distinction that Doug should be making here. It doesn't look like there are any Nazis who, are in the wings waiting to take over the governments of Europe. There may be some fascists, but those fascists seem to be focused on governing their own countries, and not attacking other countries. I don't, see any aggressive nationalists, in Europe today, and that includes actually Vladimir Putin. They are more similar what we would have called in earlier times, which you would have said in earlier times, instances of patriotism. So I want to point out that the term nationalism used to have a very negative connotation in the World War II period and the post-World War II period. But now perhaps it doesn't have the same kind, okay, of negative connotation. I think Doug himself thinks that he is a nationalist. And I think that he thinks that Trump is a nationalist. I don't think he thinks that Trump is a fascist. And we may have some disagreements about that.
Nationalists, globalists, Rubio is clearly one of those, are not worried about those things. Those countries just contain people who are fungible commodities. How many have to be sacrificed for the greater good of changing the world to suit them?
He's talking about here the globalists, okay, who share the ideology, okay, of neoliberalism. And he thinks correctly that Marco Rubio is one of them.
And their so-called rules-based order is all that counts. But he doesn't understand that these governments are coming to a climax. You're going to see it in Germany. You're going to see it in France. People are going to watch a government come to power, and then they're going to say, well, that's not so bad. And they're wrong. It's still somewhat globalist in its orientation. It's not going to last. This process is going to continue until nationalist governments replace everything that's out there. If you look at Tusk in Poland, he's hanging on by his fingernails. Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia, these are already nationalist governments. Austria is a nationalist government now. Everybody is saying, what is in our interest? The EU does not act on our behalf. The EU is part of the problem. NATO is entangling us in wars we don't want to fight. Everything that Rubio takes for granted assumes, the key assumptions being that nothing really has changed, are false.
Breakfast foods to avoid.
At some point, these governments are going to say, thank you very much, get out. We're not interested in fighting in your war.
Well,
It's already true. People in Poland are always saying, listen, we don't want to die for Ukraine. We don't even like the Ukrainians. So the problem is this is all going to go away. He's going to have no influence, and Trump will have no influence. The best thing that he can do is read the tea leaves, do the things we discussed at the beginning, and then say, I am happy to host a peace conference where the states that border Russia and the Russians and Ukrainians can all sit down to work out their differences and come up with a solution. Instead, he is acting as though we have to provide the solution. Not only have to provide it, we must impose it. We can't. Those days are over. This is a new world now. The Russians aren't going to put up with it. Nobody else in the BRICS community will, and increasingly that's going to be true for Europe.
Yeah, you mentioned at the start of this that the incoming administration and all the people that are working for Trump are trying to get a win out of this and put a good face on it. But I think Rubio's trying to thread that needle by, admitting that Ukraine's never going to win back its territory and they're going to have to make concessions, et cetera. But then he tries to have it kind of both ways by saying, and the Russians are also going to have to give up some things in order, he said, to get a ceasefire. That's apparently what he thinks is going to start this process. But to your point a minute ago about what the Russians think and say, they're saying, yeah, that's a no-go.
We cannot be satisfied with empty talk. So far, all we've heard is talk about the need to come up with some kind of truce. And it's not particularly hidden that this truce is needed in order to gain time to continue pumping weapons into Ukraine. A truce is a road to nowhere.
And certainly it is, because Russia doesn't need a truce. Russia doesn't need a ceasefire. They're winning already on the battlefield, and their manpower, they continue to restock the kitty every day, every month. They actually bring in somewhere around 1,000 recruits per day. And I don't know what their casualty rates is, but it's less than that. So they're able to continue to grow their forces, whereas, of course, it's shrinking on the Ukraine side. So if Rubio is thinking that we're going to try to get a ceasefire to start the process, I think the battlefield is going to have a different outcome.
So there's another bit of what actual reality is like. Danny Davis, just gave us that. And that's a part of the truth that we're trying to sketch out for you here tonight. This is what things are really like in Ukraine and the situation we really face. And there's a great discrepancy between that and what the people Trump has nominated for key positions in the foreign policy establishment are saying. There's no indication they understand what the real truth is. Maybe Marco Rubio had a glimmering of that. But the idea that the Russians have to compromise, given the actual situation on the ground in Ukraine, okay, is ridiculous. I also want to go back, okay, to the proposal that Doug just made, okay, specifically that we propose to have a conference on settling the war, and saying we'll be happy to host the conference, but that nations of Europe that have been involved in the fighting in Ukraine have to settle it among themselves, and that we will have no role, okay, in settling it, that we're not going to tell anyone what to do. That kind of posture from us is very, very important for us to regain a modicum of trust. That is to say, a modicum of Russian trust towards us. Because in all our actions since the early 2000s, we've destroyed any trust that the Russians may have had in us. And at one time, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Russians had considerable trust in us. And all they got for their trouble was the looting of their country by Western elites. Most Americans don't know about this chapter, okay, in history. And since they don't know it, they just assume that there's no reason for the Russians to mistrust us. But that period, during the 1990s, followed by the period when Putin was trying to, build up Russia again, and the resistance that we gave to that, and then the very hostile moves towards Russia from 2008 on, the breaking of agreements, multiple agreements, the overthrow of a government of Ukraine that at least was neutral towards the Russians. All this has built up a tremendous barrier of mistrust. And we have a long way to go before we acquire a modicum of trust from the Russians again. And we need that trust in order to, deal with them on a collaborative basis in a way that, that's beneficial both to us, okay, and to them. So here's Doug again commenting on what Danny Davis just said. Okay, by the way, Danny Davis is also a colonel, a retired colonel. Doug is a retired colonel as well.
Oh, absolutely. He's King Lear in the storm raging at the weather. It's a waste of time. It's going to go nowhere. But again, you're correct. Everybody thinks that there's got to be a win. Nixon and Kissinger were trying to construct something that could be billed as a win. Well, the only win for the United States was to get out of Vietnam. Everything else was lost. And one can argue that everything was lost there on the first day because we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't even know where to go, what to do, whom to attack. And this continued for years. So we're in a very similar position now. The win for us is extricating ourselves from this star baby. Get out, say goodbye, move on. I think that's what will eventually happen because I'm afraid President Trump is surrounded by people that will prevent him from doing what makes sense, which is what we just discussed earlier. Offer to host something, but otherwise announce we're leaving, we're out, it's over. We're not going to do this anymore, which would make infinite sense. And it would be a big win here in the United States.
So here we have to point out that both in the situation in Gaza and the situation inside, okay, of Ukraine, we can boost the possibility of settlement of both of those wars if we just stop feeding the wars, stop sending arms, stop supporting the combatants. That's how we disengage ourselves from these tar babies, as Doug has put it.
Well, that's actually what I was about to say. That it depends on your definition of win. If it's something classic, that's not even on the table.
If you're unsure or unaware of your eyeglass prescription,
is some creative thinking that actually says, hey, there is a way that you can come out with a win. Now, of course, his political enemies will be against it no matter what, because the Biden administration on its way out the door has gone to extreme lengths at the president, the Secretary of State, and Secretary of Defense to all say they have set up Ukraine to stand on its own, and only Trump undermining that can potentially lose it. So if he did what you suggested, that's what they would say to him. But I think that there's a lot of plausibility to say he's not going to win those people over anyway. So just forget about that. This is what makes sense, and the people who elected him to be president would love it, I believe.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. Back in 2005, I remember having a conversation with several people, and I said, we just need to leave Iraq. You know, you got Saddam Hussein. What are we doing here? Let's just get out. And everybody said the same thing. Oh, we can't just leave. And, you know, my answer was, well, that's what we're going to do anyway, because we don't live there. It's not Kansas. It's not Missouri. So I think, you know, it would be useful if somebody sat down with President Trump, if he would listen, provide him with some truth instead of lies about the great Ukrainian success story, point to the absolutely systemic corruption, and say it's time for us to get out of this thing. We can't fix it. We don't want to rule it. We don't want to pay for it. We're out. But we'll be happy to host a conference. And the Russians would take that as a very positive development, because they're tired of us trying to impose things on them. And we don't want war with Russia. You see, this is the other problem. Everybody is promoting hostility to Russia in Washington. But we don't need it. We don't want it. There's no reason for it. But you have this phony dichotomy. You have the democratic states on one side and the authoritarians on the other. I mean, it's a false dichotomy. It makes no sense at all. But that's the sort of lie that continues to be promoted. That's General Hodges and everybody like him.
And, you know, one of the other, I guess, enduring and popular lies that has also continued on throughout this is the claim that Zelensky makes this all the time. And I think Jack Keane has lifted this up, and certainly a number of others, that says, hey, the Russian is out to get you. If he gets Ukraine, he is definitely going to go to the West, and he's going to conquer everybody because he wants to recreate the Soviet Union, et cetera. You mentioned something at the beginning of this, and Lavrov actually yesterday at a press conference addressed some of that they are focused not on conquering land in the West. They are focused on protecting the ethnic Russians in the eastern part of what was Ukraine.
The return of Donald Trump has fueled speculation of a peace deal in Ukraine. Is he the master deal maker he claims to be? And how far is Russia willing to go? What concessions are you willing to make to reach an agreement?
Neither the narrative nor anyone's discourse has addressed the rights of Russians, whose language, whose culture, education, media, and whose canonical religion were banned by law in Ukraine. There will be no serious conversations if the West pretends that this is normal. And when the outgoing administration in the person of Blinken and Sullivan says that they are confident that the new White House will continue the policy of supporting Ukraine, is this a testament to exterminate everything Russian as before?
Now, so people can understand what he's talking about. He's not just talking about the ethnic Russians on the Russian side of the line of contact here, but the apparently the minimum that Putin will settle for is all four of the oblasts that they annex, and that includes all of this gray area right here, which is still fully controlled by the Ukraine side. So what Lavrov and Putin have said is that the entry point for negotiations is this line right here, which means that the Ukraine side would have to literally withdraw from that position here, because he said he's not going to have the line here because all of the ethnic Russians that still live here, and actually you can go into Odessa and Kharkiv City, there's quite a lot in there too. And that's what animated them to make the what they called a special military operation in the first place, is the needs of the ethnic Russians over here. So if it's not going into the West, but it's here, it seems to me, again, to your point that you made earlier, that this is something that the Western side and possibly the Trump people here are misunderstanding about what the objectives are of the Russians. So it's hard to come up with a negotiated settlement if you don't know what the Russians are really after. And I can't hear you, Doug. Gary, can you hear? I don't hear Doug right
Doug,
now.
can you turn your microphone back on for us?
When
Here we go.
When the Russians intervened in eastern Ukraine initially, the argument was, well, the Russian army is too small. It's not well enough equipped. It's not sufficiently trained. And they're losing to the Ukrainians, who are so much better. Well, if your plan was always to reconquer everything that we call the Warsaw Pact, then you would have thought that the army was overly large, very lethal, and ready to march west at hypersonic speed. Well, that wasn't the case. So how do you then say now he's ready to march west? Well, Russia has done what it has to do to defend itself and to defend its people inside eastern Ukraine. If they were really committed to this massive offensive, would they have waited this long? Would they have exercised as much restraint as they have, particularly in the face of these long-range strike weapons that we've given to the Ukrainians that have harmed people inside Russia proper? Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't pass the smell test. It's all nonsense. But one would think at this point it would be a huge mistake to underestimate Russian resolve to secure itself. And if you leave them no alternative to march further west, they'll do it. So at this point, it would make infinite sense to hold that conference we discussed and come to some sort of arrangement.
Right. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Okay, I think I'm going to stop this here. Okay, it's getting late. The rest of this is very good, though, also. It seemed like a wonderful conversation to me with both Danny Davis, okay, and Doug, amplifying the truth inside of Ukraine, what our situation is there, and what we ought to do about it. And the plan is very clear. I think it's a good plan. I think the American people will accept it. I think Trump can very easily sell it. Have you any comments on this, Dee?
I like I said, I agree with what he's saying, and I think that when it comes, as you said, Trump shouldn't have a hard time selling it.
He shouldn't have a hard time selling it. But I was so pleased with this video because I thought there was just an unusual amount of truth that was running through it, both from the perspective of the interviewer and the perspective of the guest.
Right.
They both were telling the truth as they saw it. It was a very consensual, kind, of conversation. It was very good at calling out also the falsities of the conventional wisdom and what has been going on inside, of Ukraine. So I'm going to stop sharing that now. Okay, I have to ask, we have one more video left to go through. Okay, it probably involves another half hour of time. They're about 8 minutes and another 5 minutes, so it's 13 minutes video that probably translates to about a half hour time. Okay, it's Pepe Escobar video on Trump 2.0. But I think it's too late now to go ahead with that. Then we ought to wind up this video. But do you agree, Dee?
Yes, and if you want, if you're up to it, I could get together a show tomorrow night.
Yes, I am up to it.
Okay, and then we'll just continue on, and then whatever else we'll bring into it.
Okay, so you want to take the Pepe Escobar video for your show then?
Right, you can play it on my show, yes.
Okay, that would be great. Okay, and your show would be what, at 9:15 tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Tomorrow
is Sunday.
Yeah, it's not that it's Sunday. I have a commitment to. I'm afraid I have a commitment to watch a football game with some people here.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think I'll be available. It's the game starts at 6:30. I very rarely watch football games. This is a real exception. But it starts at 6:30. It might not be over by 9:30. It might by 9:15. But I guess I can't really count on that.
Okay.
Okay, but okay, I think the Pepe Escobar video is important. If you want to go over it on your show tomorrow night, I think.
Well, I was just going to put a special show together for tomorrow night. Or else we could do it Monday. If you want to do Monday, then you'll have your thing on Tuesday.
Right. If you were going to put together a special show, though, for tomorrow night, okay, if you postpone the Pepe Escobar video until the last part of your show,
Oh, okay.
I'm sure I would be able to make that.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I should be able to join. In my experience, football games don't last more than 3 hours and often less time than that. So I would be done by about 9:30 or so. I could probably join by 9:45 or 10 o'clock.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay. Okay, so let's do that then.
All righty, sounds good.
Should we go over the last comments then?
Yes, yes, Friar Steve has some comments here. He's been very active commenting.
Yes, he usually is. Oh, come on.
Okay, well, it's good that Evelina says, Friar Steve, I look at various sources for contrast. Yes, that's what I do too. You want to see different viewpoints.
Who
It's
do you
important.
think is funded by the state? RT is for sure. RT is for sure funded by the state, but that doesn't mean that Putin interferes in what they do. Oh, and every word he says, okay, is Kremlin approved. No, no. It isn't true that every word that is said on RT is Kremlin approved. I think I've got my statistics right, Friar Steve, and I think that those statistics are going to be shown to be right very soon now. Russia invaded Crimea, Russia invaded Ukraine, Finland, and Sweden out of fear joined NATO. I don't see the Russians invading Finland. I mean, in recent years, I haven't seen the Russians invading Finland. They did take over Crimea. Yes, but Crimea had a population, 95% of which was Russian, and they were only part of Ukraine because an accident of history. The accident of history was Khrushchev giving the Crimea to Ukraine back in something like 1954. It was a gift to Ukraine, probably motivated by the fact that Khrushchev's mother was Ukrainian.
Mhm. And, you talk about RT being what's being said is Kremlin controlled. It makes me laugh because when Lee Camp had his show on RT, could you imagine Lee Camp having to go through the Kremlin before his show starts?
Yeah, it's not only Lee Camp, but also Scott Ritter swears that there was no interference at all with his articles, okay, on RT. They had absolutely nothing to do with what he said. Furthermore, Jamal Thomas worked not for RT, but for Sputnik, okay, as a commentator for some time until interference by the U.S. government caused Sputnik to fold up quite a lot of its operations. Okay, I know Jamal. I've interviewed him, a number of times. Nobody ever dictates what he says, and I saw his shows on Sputnik as well, and nobody was dictating what he said. I can tell you that. Okay, when Anya Parampil was working for RT, which she did for some time, she also was saying things that were not determined by the Russian government at all. They were far too radical, of course. And yet another example is Fiorella Isabel. She is living in Moscow now. I think she still is living there and working for RT, and has been for some time. And her programs are very straightforward, okay, and very honest. There's no indication of any Kremlin influence. I personally think Putin is far too busy to dictate the content of those shows. I would say, in generally speaking, that the narratives of RT are less controlled by the state than the narratives in our mainstream press are.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yes.
If anything is state controlled, would say the U.S.
As long as he's taking money from the Kremlin, he will not be in the Trump cabinet. Are you suggesting that Doug is taking money from the Kremlin? Are you crazy?
He has a military retirement.
Not only does he have a military retirement, but he makes money from his books, and he's also the president of our country, Our Choice, which is an American think tank here, supported by some rich people in this country. But Doug McGregor is not pro-Russian. He is extremely pro-American. He is what you call a nationalist. He calls himself a nationalist. He's contributed to Fox News and has appeared on the Russian state-funded channel RT. He may have appeared on that channel, but that doesn't mean he was paid for his appearance. And as far as Fox News is concerned, don't tell me that Fox News is Russian state-funded, because if you think that, you've just gone off the deep end. Doc, the moment I hear Trump condition Israel, I'll buy you 3 coffees. Meanwhile, let me buy you 1 coffee. Sure. Thank you very much for us, Steve. McGregor is pro-Russia. No, he's not pro-Russia. He's not pro-Russia at all. He's pro-America. If you want to find out what he thinks, read his articles at the American Conservative. They're freely available. Finland and Sweden are now in NATO thanks to this war. Yes, Finland and Sweden made some very stupid decisions. Very, very stupid, decisions, because now they have Russian missiles aimed at them. Before the war, they had no such thing. Russia thought they were going to walk right into Kiev. No, they didn't think they were going to walk right into Kiev. That start at the beginning of the war was a feint. And the reason why it was a feint is because they only had 90,000 soldiers doing it. They couldn't hope to take over Kiev. What they were trying to do at the beginning of the war was to create the basis for a peace agreement. You know what? They negotiated a peace agreement in March of 2021, and everybody had signed it except the final signature from Zelensky, and it went back to him for final signature. But before he could sign it, Boris Johnson flew to Russia and said that he would sign it. There was never going to be another dollar of British or American aid for Ukraine, and said also, on the other hand, if Ukraine kept fighting, then we would support them for as long as it takes for them to win. That's what happened there. Russia wanted a peace agreement. There were very generous terms for Ukraine also, and Ukraine failed to finalize the peace agreement. That's exactly what happened. Just because Doug appeared on RT doesn't mean he took any money from RT. Depends on what the appearance was. But even if he took money from RT, many people have taken money from RT, and their opinions have not been directed by RT in any measure. Friar Steve says, Evelina, he took money from the Kremlin. Look how RT is funded. Well, that doesn't mean he took money from the Kremlin. There are people who go on to CBS constantly who take money from the Defense Department, who take money from the CIA. That doesn't necessarily mean that their opinions will reflect that. Now, we can't approach each and every video we see and assume that that video reflects the opinions of people who are funding it. It's often true that it does reflect those opinions, but sometimes, it doesn't. Political Revolution Shenandoah Valley is here for the first time in a very long time. And he says, you need to play your videos on this, not YouTube, HTTPS, newpipe.net. Thank you very much. I will look into that. Friar Steve says, Evelina, you just don't want to follow the money, do you? Laugh out loud. Friar Steve, Russia invaded Crimea, Russia invaded Ukraine, Finland. I don't think Russia has invaded Finland recently, and it hasn't invaded Sweden recently also. Friar Steve says, as long as he's taking money from the Kremlin, he will not be in the Trump cabinet. He's not taking any money from the Kremlin right now. If you're working for RT, you're taking money from the Kremlin. No, you're not. Okay. Doc, you don't have your statistics right at all. I'll bet you I do. Friar Steve says, RT is Russian state controlled. Do you consider state funded in the U.S., millionaire funded? State funded media here in the U.S. Is funded by all kinds of people. If you're talking about PBS, it's funded by the state as well. But it's obvious that many of the people on PBS do not reflect the opinions of the State Department. The Democracy Now!, for example, has very little in common with the opinions of the State Department, and yes, it is state funded. Evelina says, like Colonel McGregor just said. Feisty says, Voice of America and NPR. Who else? The Voice of America is a propaganda organization and always has been, but NPR is an educational organization, and it doesn't generally reflect the opinions of the United States government. Frey says Evelina upon, oddly enough, though he's funded by Russian television, which is funded by the Kremlin state-controlled. Who is funded? Show me the money, Friar Steve. Show me the money. Give me the references. Evelina Pont, do you think that CNN is funded by government? No, but I think it's okay. It's funded in many ways by billionaires who control the narrative. Evelina, who do you think is funded by the state? RT is for sure. Bullshit. It's just bullshit. You can't just say it without evidence. Why not? You're saying all kinds of things without evidence, Friar Steve, or any references at all. You are the problem with misinformation like this. Fox is not state funded. You have been fooled. I haven't said Fox was state funded. What I'm saying is that the state, in the person of the Congress people, is funded by billionaires. And I'm also saying that the same billionaires are funding the mass media organs. The same people who are funding the politicians. Evelyn says, I could swear his ears have gotten bigger. I'm telling you, he's a Vulcan. Friar Steve says, you should read Alexander Dugin again. Putin violated the Budapest Memorandum. He would never be allowed to walk in Western society again. Well, that's bullshit on the 2 counts. It's doubtful he violated it. He's very legalistic, and it's doubtful that he violated it. And secondly, when all this is over, he will be he will be able to walk in Western society again. Okay, by the way, the people from Western society cannot walk into Russia right now. But when the Nord Stream pipeline is restored, and when gas is flowing into Europe again, and when the Ukraine war looks like something out of the past, Putin will be able to walk in Western society again. There won't be any problem about that. Sure, how you all think Trump is going to take 2 L's. Let's see how this looks a year from now. There was no extra strategy for Iraq until Gates came to office. December 2011 was his deadline. There was no exit strategy for Iraq until Secretary of Defense Gates 2011 was his plan. Putin tried a coup in Montenegro, saying it was to protect the ethnic Russians. That's why they joined NATO. Protecting Germans is why Hitler invaded many places. Putin's playing that card. He's not doing it all over Europe. He's doing it in places that border Russia and that used to be a part of the Soviet Union and who are no longer part of Russia because of what happened when the Soviet Union fell apart. That's all. If you know what Putin's thinking, just as McGregor, he's a mouthpiece for the Kremlin. No, he's not. I mean, just because you disagree with a person, that doesn't mean he's a mouthpiece for the Kremlin. He says, I don't rely on Russian television for my information. I do. Real foundation of geopolitics, read up on Alexander Dugin. Alexander Dugin is Russian, and he's close to the Russian state. But you evidently believe what he has to say. Friar Steve says, let's go, Doc. Can you name the videos that I can look it up now after we get off? I can't off the top of my head, Friar Steve. I'm sorry. I look at various sources for contract, yes. evenly camp. Chris Hedges was going to run for Green Party, but he couldn't because of his connections with RT and Kremlin funding. That's bullshit.
That is BS. The thing is when you look at the media.
Yeah, I know she's working in RT. She's working at RT. She's living in Moscow. I know that, but she's still an independent voice. Farsi says, "We know. I knew her from LA. I knew her from She's no longer welcome among the Bernie movement in LA." Well, I don't care whether she's welcome in the Bernie movement or not. She's far too radical for the Bernie movement in LA. If you work for RT, that's where your paycheck comes from. Well, actually, writers such as Scott Ritter have a number of sources, of funds. Doug McGregor has a number of sources and funds. If they make $1 or $2 from RT, that doesn't mean that they're reflecting the opinions of Margaret Semignon. Friar Steve, but now Finland and Sweden will never be invaded by Russia. That's a guarantee. They won't be invaded by Russia anyway, because Russia doesn't want to invade them. I think you were trying to say Boris went to Ukraine, not Russia. I was trying to say that. Thanks. Friar Steve, thanks for reading my comments, Doc. Doc, I will produce receipts for you next time. I'm looking forward to it. Doc, I was talking to Eve. Sorry, Doc. Eve and I were having a conversation online. Exactly, he's doing it in the FSU countries. The FSU countries? I meant the video for the next episode. Okay, Friar Steve. I guess that's about it for the night, right? I guess we can close this off now, right, Dave?
Yes, we can.
I covered all of the comments.
Yes, and thank you everybody for being here.
And thank you for all the comments and the energetic video. It was very energetic.
Yes.
So I'm going to say goodnight. I still have a phone call to make after this is all over.
Okay, so we will be back tomorrow. Well, I'll start the show at 9:15, and whenever Joe
Okay, I
can
will
join
probably
me.
be back. I'll probably be back by 9:45.
All righty.
In time to cover that video. Okay, thank you, Dee.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah, good night. Good night.
Good night, Friar Steve. And good night. Yeah, I'm watching the Ravens and the Ravens and the Bills tomorrow.
All righty. Good night, Bonnie.
Good night. Okay, good night, Dee.
Good night.